Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into a world that feels both familiar and impossibly distant, a vast prehistoric landscape stretching beneath a cold and silent sky where the air carries the faint scent of earth and frost, and the ground beneath your feet feels firm, untouched and ancient. You stand at the edge of a wide open plain where low grasses ripple gently in the night breeze, and somewhere in the distance a small fire flickers like a fragile heartbeat in the dark. There are no cities, no distant hum of machines, only the quiet presence of early humans living their lives in ways that feel simple yet deeply connected to the land around them. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always calming to imagine how many different nights this story is travelling through. Now dim the lights and you begin to walk slowly forward into this ancient scene, your steps soft against the cool ground, careful not to disturb the quiet rhythm of a world that has existed long before anything you recognise. The time you have entered is roughly 70,000 years ago, deep within what scientists call the late Pleistocene. This was a period shaped by Ice Age conditions where large parts of the Earth were colder, drier, and far less predictable than today. Massive ice sheets covered distant lands, sea levels were lower, and ecosystems stretched in unfamiliar ways across continents. Early humans known as Homo sapiens had already emerged in Africa tens of thousands of years earlier, and small groups had begun to spread into new regions. You notice that life here is not hurried. There is no rush, no noise beyond what the natural world provides. A small group of humans moves in the distance, their silhouettes faint against the firelight. They are dressed in simple coverings made from animal hides, their movements deliberate, shaped by habit and necessity rather than urgency. In many ways, this was the normal pattern of human life for most of our existence. Early humans lived in small mobile groups, often no more than a few dozen individuals relying on hunting animals and gathering plants to survive. Food was never guaranteed. Every decision carried quiet importance. And yet there is a sense of balance here, a rhythm that feels steady, almost reassuring. You move closer, noticing the details that define their world. The ground is uneven, scattered with stones and faint traces of earlier activity. The air carries the soft scent of smoke from the fire, mixed with the subtle dryness of the surrounding land. You hear low voices, not quite words in the way you would understand them, but sounds filled with meaning, shared between people who depend on one another completely. And yet, as calm as this moment feels, something is not quite right. It is not something you can see immediately. The fire burns steadily. The group moves with quiet familiarity. The stars above remain unchanged. But beneath this surface there is a shift beginning, something subtle, something that will shape the course of human history in ways that are still not fully understood. Researchers today continue to question what exactly happened during this period. Genetic evidence suggests that around 70,000 years ago, the human population may have dropped dramatically, possibly to just a few thousand individuals. Some scientists describe this as a genetic bottleneck, a moment when humanity came dangerously close to disappearing entirely. Others suggest that the decline may not have been quite so extreme, pointing out that the evidence is still incomplete and open to interpretation. As you watch the group before you, it becomes difficult to imagine such a fragile situation. They seem stable, capable, adapted to their environment. And yet the data we have today tells a different story, one that hints at vulnerability hidden beneath apparent strength. You take another slow step, feeling the coolness of the night settle gently around you. The fire crackles softly now, sending small sparks upward into the dark sky. One of the figures near the fire adjusts a piece of wood, carefully tending the flame. Fire at this point in history was already a central part of human life. It provided warmth, protection from predators, and a way to cook food, making it easier to digest and safer to consume. A lesser-known detail is that early humans may have spent hours each day simply maintaining their fire, ensuring that it did not go out. Unlike today, where you can create fire almost instantly, these groups often relied on preserving embers, carrying them from place to place, treating them as something precious. You pause watching as a child moves closer to the warmth, their small hands extended toward the gentle heat. The scene feels peaceful, almost timeless, and you might find yourself wondering, how could a world like this, quiet and steady, ever come close to collapse? Some researchers suggest that environmental pressures played a major role. Climate shifts during the Ice Age could have altered habitats, reduced food availability, and forced human groups into increasingly difficult conditions. Others point toward more dramatic events, such as the massive eruption of a supervolcano in what is now Indonesia, known as Toba. This eruption, which occurred around 74,000 years ago, may have released enormous amounts of ash into the atmosphere, potentially cooling the planet and disrupting ecosystems. But here is where the uncertainty deepens. Not all scholars agree on the scale of this event's impact. Some argue that the eruption caused a global volcanic winter, severely reducing human populations. Others believe its effects may have been more regional, less catastrophic than once thought. The truth remains unclear, resting somewhere between these interpretations. As you stand in this quiet moment, the debate feels distant, almost abstract. What you see instead is immediate, tangible. A group of humans alive, present, continuing their routines without any awareness of how close their species may be to a turning point. You take a slow breath, noticing the stillness again. The wind moves gently across the plain. The fire continues to glow, the voices remain soft, steady. And yet there is a feeling beneath it all, something subtle but persistent, like the faintest shift in the air before a change you cannot yet see. You remain there for a while, allowing the scene to settle around you, letting the quiet details become familiar. The texture of the ground beneath your feet, the warmth of the fire on your skin, the distant shapes of land fading into darkness. This is where the story begins, not with noise or urgency, but with quiet, with stillness, with a world that seems balanced even as something unseen begins to move beneath its surface. And as you continue forward step by careful step, you begin to realize that understanding this lost age is not just about what happened. It is about what almost did not survive. You remain close to the fading warmth of the fire, and as your eyes adjust more fully to the darkness, the wider world begins to reveal itself in gentle layers. The group before you is only one small presence within a vast and quiet landscape. Beyond them, the land stretches outward into low hills, scattered trees and distant shadows that hint at rivers and valleys you cannot yet see. To understand this moment more clearly, it helps to step slightly back into the broader context of this time. Around 70,000 years ago, early humans had already existed for a long span of time, having first appeared in Africa roughly 300,000 years earlier. By this period, some groups had begun to move outward into parts of the Middle East and possibly further into Asia. Movement was slow, not like modern travel, but gradual, unfolding across generations rather than within a single lifetime. You begin to notice that this group reflects that slow expansion. Their features, their tools, their behavior all align with what scientists identify as early Homo sapiens. They are not primitive in the way people once imagined. In fact, many researchers now agree that these humans were remarkably capable, possessing cognitive abilities not so different from your own. You watch as one of the adults kneels near a flat stone, carefully striking another rock against it. The sound is soft but deliberate. With each controlled motion, a thin fragment breaks away, forming a sharp edge. This is a technique known today as flint knapping, a method used to create tools for cutting, scraping, and shaping materials. Stone tools like these are among the most important pieces of evidence we have from this era. Archaeological sites across Africa and parts of Eurasia have revealed a wide variety of carefully crafted implements, suggesting that early humans were not only skilled, but also capable of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. A lesser-known detail is that some tool styles remained consistent across large distances, indicating that ideas may have spread between groups over time. Even without written language, knowledge moved through observation, imitation, and shared experience. You shift your attention to the edge of the group where a few individuals are preparing food. The smell reaches you faintly now, something earthy and slightly smoky. It is likely a mixture of gathered plants and cooked meat. Diet. During this period varied widely depending on location, but many groups relied on a combination of hunting and gathering, adapting to whatever the environment could provide. In some regions, early humans hunted large animals such as deer or wild cattle, often working together in coordinated efforts. In other places, they focused more heavily on smaller animals, fish and plant resources. Flexibility was essential. Survival depended not on strength alone, but on the ability to adapt. You might find it interesting that recent studies suggest early humans were not constant hunters of large game as once believed. Instead, their diets were often diverse and opportunistic, including roots, fruits, seeds, and even insects. This balanced approach may have helped them survive in environments where food sources changed with the seasons. As you observe, you notice how calm the interactions are. There is no loud command, no obvious hierarchy. People move around one another with quiet awareness, each person contributing in small but meaningful ways. Someone adjusts a bundle of materials. Another checks the fire. A child watches closely, learning through simple observation. Scholars remain divided on the exact structure of early human societies. Some suggest that these groups were largely egalitarian, with decisions made collectively, rather than enforced by a single leader. Others propose that subtle forms of leadership may have existed, especially during hunts or times of stress. What seems clear is that cooperation was essential. No one here could survive alone. You take a slow step forward, feeling the ground shift slightly beneath you. The soil is firm but not frozen, holding the faint traces of earlier movement. Footprints overlap and fade, blending into one another in a way that tells a quiet story of daily life. The night air carries a gentle chill, now reminding you that temperatures during this period were often lower than what you might be used to today. The Ice Age was not a single continuous freeze, but a series of colder and warmer phases. Even so, conditions could be harsh, especially in certain regions. You glance upward. The sky is clear, filled with stars that feel closer, brighter, untouched by any artificial light. For these early humans, the night sky would have been a constant presence, a silent companion to their lives. Some researchers suggest that early forms of symbolic thinking may have included attention to the stars, though evidence for this remains uncertain. What is certain is that darkness here is complete. Beyond the firelight, the world fades quickly into shadow. This makes the fire even more important. It is not just warmth, it is safety, visibility, and a gathering point that holds the group together. You notice a small movement near the edge of the light. One of the adults pauses, looking outward into the darkness. Their posture shifts slightly, alert but not alarmed. It is a reminder that this world is shared with other creatures. Predators move through the same land, following their own rhythms. And yet the group remains calm. There is no panic, only awareness. You might wonder how often danger truly appeared in moments like this. Some historians suggest that while threats from predators existed, they may not have been as constant as once imagined. Early humans armed with fire and simple weapons were not entirely defenseless. Still, caution was always present, woven quietly into daily life. As you continue to observe, the sense of balance returns. The group eats, rests, and prepares for the next part of their journey, whatever that may be. There is no fixed home here. These people move with the land, following resources, seasons, and opportunity. Nomadic life was a defining feature of this era. Groups rarely stayed in one place for long, especially when food sources became scarce. This constant movement shaped not only survival strategies, but also the way humans understood their world. Land was not owned. It was experienced, remembered, and revisited when conditions allowed. You let that idea settle gently. Today, the concept of staying in one place, building permanent homes, and storing large amounts of food feels natural. But here, none of that exists yet. Everything is immediate. Everything is carried, used, and left behind. And still, despite the simplicity, there is a quiet sophistication in the way this life unfolds. You watch as the group begins to settle for the night. Some lie down close to the fire. Others remain seated, speaking softly. their voices blending with the subtle sounds of the environment. The air cools further, and the warmth of the fire becomes even more noticeable. It feels peaceful, stable, almost unchanging. But beneath this calm surface, the larger forces of the world are already in motion. Climate, environment, and perhaps even rare catastrophic events are shaping conditions in ways these people cannot perceive. And as you remain there standing quietly at the edge of their world, you begin to sense that this balance, however steady it seemed, is more fragile than it appears. You remain with the group as the night slowly deepens, and over time the quiet activity begins to soften into rest. One by one, bodies settle closer to the fire, forming a loose circle of warmth and presence. The flames burn lower now, shifting from bright flickers to a steady glowing bed of embers. The air grows colder, brushing gently against your skin, and you become more aware of the delicate balance between warmth and exposure that defines life in this era. To understand the rhythm of their lives, you begin to notice how closely everything is tied to the natural cycles around them. During the late Pleistocene, daily life was not measured by clocks or schedules, but by light, temperature, and movement across the land. Days were shaped by the rising and setting of the sun. Seasons were marked not by calendars, but by subtle changes in vegetation, animal behavior, and weather patterns. You imagine what a full day might feel like here. The group would wake with the first light, often before the sun fully rises. The air would be cold, sometimes biting, especially in open landscapes like this. Breath would be visible in the morning, small clouds forming and fading with each exhale. There would be no lingering into comfort. Movement begins early because survival depends on it. You watch as one individual still awake carefully adjusts their position, pulling an animal hide more tightly around their body. Clothing in this period was simple but effective. Early humans used animal skins not just for warmth, but also for protection against wind and moisture. Some archaeological evidence suggests that hides were scraped and softened, using stone tools, making them more flexible and comfortable to wear. A lesser known detail is that bone needles used for sewing may have appeared later than this period, meaning that much of the clothing you see here is likely wrapped or tied rather than stitched in complex ways. Even so, the ability to adapt materials to environmental needs shows a quiet ingenuity. As the night continues, you notice that sleep here is not as deep or uninterrupted as it might be in a modern home. People shift occasionally, adjusting to sounds, temperature changes, or subtle movements nearby. The fire requires attention even through the night. Someone rises briefly to add a piece of wood, ensuring that the embers do not fade completely. Sleep in this world is light, responsive, and shared. You might wonder how restful it truly was. Some researchers suggest that early humans may have slept in shorter cycles, waking periodically before returning to rest. Others believe that the presence of a group provided enough safety to allow deeper sleep than we might expect. The truth remains uncertain, as so much of this experience leaves no direct trace. Eventually, the faintest hint of change begins to appear in the sky. It is not yet light, but the darkness softens slightly, losing its depth. The stars begin to fade one by one as the horizon prepares for dawn. You feel the shift before you see it. The temperature dips briefly, that quiet moment just before the first light when the cold feels most noticeable. Then slowly the land begins to reveal itself again. Shapes return, the outlines of figures, the texture of the ground, the distant curve of the landscape. The group stirs. Movement is gradual. Someone sits up, stretching stiff limbs. Another leans towards the fire, coaxing it back to life with careful breaths and small pieces of dry material. Smoke rises in thin, twisting lines, carrying a familiar scent that settles into the air. This is how each day begins, without urgency, without noise, but with purpose. You step slightly back, observing how roles begin to form almost naturally. A few individuals prepare to move outward, likely in search of food. Others remain near the camp, tending to tasks that keep the group functioning. There is no clear separation, no rigid system, but a fluid sharing of responsibility. Historians often describe this as a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but that phrase can feel overly simple. In reality, it involved a complex understanding of the environment. knowledge of where to find water, which plants were safe to eat, how animals moved across the land, all of this was essential. Mistakes could be costly, and yet this knowledge was not written down. It lived in memory, in observation, in repetition. You notice a young member of the group watching closely as an older individual prepares a tool. The child's attention is steady focused. Learning here does not come from instruction in the modern sense. It comes from watching, from doing, from slowly becoming familiar with each task. Some scholars suggest that this form of learning may have been one of the foundations of human success. The ability to observe and imitate allowed knowledge to pass across generations without the need for formal systems. As the light continues to grow, the landscape reveals more of its detail. The ground is a mix of dry soil and scattered vegetation. In the distance, you can see the faint outline of a tree line, possibly marking a source of water or a more sheltered area. The group begins to prepare for movement. Nomadic life required careful decision-making. Staying in one place too long could deplete local resources. Moving too soon could mean leaving behind opportunities. These choices were made without maps or forecasts, guided instead by experience and subtle environmental cues. You might find it interesting that some researchers believe early humans had a deep mental mapping of their surroundings built over years of movement. They would remember locations of water, seasonal plant growth, and animal migration routes, forming a kind of internal geography. As the group gathers their few belongings, you notice how little they carry. Tools, hides, perhaps some food, everything must be portable. There is no room for excess. And still there is no sense of loss in leaving this place behind. It is simply part of the rhythm. You take a moment to look back at the spot where they spent the night. The fire is nearly out now, reduced to faint warmth beneath a thin layer of ash. Soon even that will disappear, leaving almost no trace that anyone was ever here. This is another quiet truth of this era. Most of human life left no permanent mark. No buildings, no monuments, only fleeting impressions in the earth. And yet from these small temporary moments, the entire story of humanity continues to unfold. As you follow the group into the soft light of morning, you begin to feel more deeply the steady rhythm that carries them forward. It is not dramatic. It does not call attention to itself, but it is constant. And within that constancy, something else continues to move quietly beneath the surface. The conditions of the world. The balance of survival, the fragile thread that connects this group to the future. You continue walking with the group as the early light stretches gently across the land, and over time the chill of the night gives way to a softer, more balanced warmth. The sky shifts from pale grey to muted gold, and with it the world feels more visible, more defined. Yet even in daylight there is a quiet simplicity here that remains unchanged. To better understand this moment, it helps to consider how central fire had already become in human life by this period. Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that humans had been using fire for hundreds of thousands of years before this time. By 70,000 years ago, it was no longer a rare or accidental discovery. It was a controlled and essential part of daily survival. You glance back at the place where the group rested. The fire is gone now, reduced to cold ash scattered lightly across the ground. But its presence still lingers in subtle ways. The faint smell of smoke clings to the air. The earth beneath it is darker, slightly altered. It is a small reminder of how something so simple could shape the entire rhythm of human existence. You walk beside one of the individuals as they carry a partially burned branch, still holding a faint glow at its tip. This is not just a leftover piece of wood. It is a carefully preserved ember, something to be protected. Creating fire from nothing was difficult and time-consuming. So early, humans often transported embers with them, ensuring that the flame could be rekindled when needed. An interesting detail that often goes unnoticed is that certain materials like dry fungus or fibrous plant matter were likely used to help carry and restart fire. These natural resources could hold a small spark for extended periods, acting almost like a slow burning memory of the previous flame. You notice how the group moves with a quiet awareness of this responsibility. The ember is not treated casually. It is checked, adjusted, and shielded from the wind. In a world where temperatures could drop quickly and darkness brought uncertainty, losing fire was not a small inconvenience. It could mean discomfort, danger, or even death. As you continue forward, the terrain begins to shift slightly. The open plain gives way to a more varied landscape with patches of low vegetation and scattered stones that crunch softly beneath your feet. The sun rises higher, bringing a gentle warmth that contrasts with the lingering coolness of the ground. The group slows, and you sense that this place offers something worth pausing for. A few individuals begin to gather material. Dry twigs, small branches, and bits of grass. The movements are familiar, practiced. Within moments, a new fire begins to take shape. The ember is placed carefully among the prepared materials, and with patient attention, small flames begin to grow. You sit near the edge of the group, feeling the warmth return as the fire builds. The sound is soft and steady, a quiet crackling that seems to anchor the moment. Smoke rises in thin streams, drifting upward and then fading into the open air. This is more than just a practical act. It is a gathering point. You notice how people begin to arrange themselves around the fire almost instinctively. Some sit close, others remain slightly back, but all orient themselves toward the same central glow. It creates a shared space, a place where attention naturally converges. Researchers have proposed that fire may have played a key role in the development of social interaction. The extended hours of light it provided allowed humans to remain active after sunset, creating opportunities for communication, storytelling, and bonding. While the exact nature of these interactions is impossible to know, many believe that the time spent around fire helps strengthen social ties. You watch as one individual gestures with their hands, making soft sounds that carry a rhythm, almost like a pattern. Others respond in kind, their expression attentive. It is not language in the fully developed sense you're familiar with, but it is clearly meaningful. Some experts suggest that early forms of language were already emerging around this time, though the details remain uncertain. What seems likely is that communication was becoming more complex, allowing for better coordination, shared planning, and perhaps even the early roots of storytelling. You lean slightly closer, noticing the textures around you. The ground is warm where the fire touches it. The air carries the mixed scent of smoke earth and something faintly sweet from nearby plants. The light flickers gently across faces, creating shifting patterns that feel almost hypnotic. And you might find yourself thinking how familiar this scene feels. Even today, people gather around fire in much the same way. Campfires, fireplaces, even candle-lit rooms carry a similar sense of calm and connection. It is a continuity that stretches across tens of thousands of years, linking your experience to theirs in a quiet and almost unnoticed way. But as comforting as this moment is, it exists within a world that is not entirely stable. Environmental conditions during the late Pleistocene were complex and often unpredictable. Ice cores and geological records indicate that climate during this period could shift over relatively short spans of time, altering temperatures, rainfall patterns, and available resources. These changes would not always be immediately visible, but their effects would gradually shape the landscape. Some researchers propose that these subtle shifts placed increasing pressure on human populations, forcing them to adapt more quickly than before. Others suggest that humans were already highly adaptable, capable of adjusting to a wide range of conditions without significant disruption. The discussion continues with new evidence adding layers rather than clear answers. As you sit beside the fire, that uncertainty feels distant yet present. You watch as someone adds another piece of wood, adjusting it carefully to maintain the balance of the flame. The fire responds, growing slightly brighter, its warmth expanding outward. It is a small act, but in this world small acts matter. You notice a child reaching toward the light again, their face calm, their movements unhurried. An adult gently guides their hand back, not with force, but with quiet understanding. There is learning here, not through instruction, but through shared experience. The group remains together for some time, resting, communicating, simply existing in the presence of one another. There is no sense of rushing forward. The day will continue when it needs to. You take a slow breath, letting the scene settle into your awareness. The warmth of the fire, the soft murmur of voices, the steady rise of smoke. This is where human connection deepens, not through grand events, but through quiet repeated moments like this. And as you sit there feeling the calm spread gently through the space, you begin to understand that survival during this lost age was not only about tools or strength, it was about staying together. You rise slowly with the group as the warmth of the fire begins to fade behind you, and once again movement becomes the quiet center of life. The landscape stretches ahead in soft tones of earth and pale green shaped by wind time and the steady passage of seasons. There is no road to follow, no visible path. Yet the group moves with quiet certainty as if the land itself is guiding their steps. To better understand this part of their world, you begin to notice how essential tools are to everything they do. Long before metal, long before machines, stone served as the primary material for shaping human survival. By this time, early humans had already developed sophisticated techniques for crafting tools using careful strikes to produce sharp, controlled edges. You walk beside one individual who carries a small collection of stones, each one chosen with intention. They pause near a flat surface and begin to work again, striking one piece against another with measured precision. The sound is rhythmic, almost meditative, each motion guided by experience rather than guesswork. This method of shaping stone, often referred to today as prepared core technology, allowed tool makers to produce flakes of predictable size and shape. Archaeological discoveries from sites across Africa and parts of Asia show that this technique was already well established by this period, suggesting a high level of planning and understanding. A detail that is easy to overlook is how much foresight this process required. Toolmakers did not simply react in the moment. They often prepared a core stone in advance, shaping it so that future strikes would produce the desired result. This meant thinking several steps ahead, holding a mental image of the final tool before it even existed. You watch as a sharp flake breaks free, thin and precise. It is small, but it carries immense value. This single piece could be used to cut meat, scrape hides, shape wood, or perform countless other tasks. In a world without abundance, efficiency matters deeply. You might find yourself comparing this to modern tools produced in factories and replaced without thought. Here, every item is carefully made, carefully used, and rarely wasted. Even broken pieces can serve a purpose. The group pauses for a moment as others gather nearby, some watching the tool-making process with quiet interest. Knowledge here is shared not through formal teaching but through presence. Observation becomes learning. Repetition becomes mastery. Some researchers suggest that this ability to pass down complex techniques played a crucial role in human survival. Without written language, the continuity of knowledge depended entirely on memory and imitation. Mistaken learning could mean the loss of a skill, and with it a reduced chance of survival. You shift your attention to another part of the group where someone uses a finished tool to work on an animal hide. The motions are steady and controlled, scraping away unwanted material to soften the surface. The sound is faint but consistent, blending with the natural background of wind and distant movement. Animal hides were an important resource during this period, providing protection against cold and wind. In colder regions, survival without proper covering would have been extremely difficult. The ability to process hides efficiently would have been a valuable skill passed carefully from one person to another. There is a subtle rhythm to all of this: the shaping of stone, the preparation of materials, the quiet exchange of knowledge. It is not hurried yet, it is precise. You continue walking, noticing how tools are carried and used throughout the group. Some are held in hand, others tucked into simple bindings or wrapped within hides. There is no excess. Each item has a purpose, and each purpose is understood. In some archaeological sites, researchers have found evidence that certain tools were transported over long distances, suggesting that early humans recognized the value of specific materials. Particular type of stone might be preferred for its sharpness or durability, leading individuals to carry it far from its original source. This suggests not only practical awareness but also planning, thinking beyond the immediate moment. You glance toward the horizon where the land dips slightly, revealing what might be a lower area where water could collect. The group adjusts its direction almost instinctively, as if guided by a shared understanding of where resources are likely to be found. It is easy to assume that life at this time was simple, but simplicity does not mean lack of complexity. Every decision carries weight, every movement reflects accumulated knowledge. There is also a quieter detail that often goes unnoticed. Not all tools were purely functional. Some may have held a kind of familiarity or preference shaped by the individual who made them. The way a tool fits in the hand, the angle of its edge, these small differences could matter. It's a reminder that even in this early time human experience was not entirely uniform. You walk alongside them as the sun climbs higher, warming the air just enough to soften the edge of the morning chill. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer now, and the light reveals subtle variations in colour and texture across the landscape. The group begins to slow again, not out of fatigue, but in response to what lies ahead. You notice signs of life in the distance, faint tracks pressed into the soil, slight disturbances in the vegetation. These are quiet indicators of animals that have passed through recently. Hunting when it occurs is not chaotic. It requires patience, awareness, and coordination. The tools you have just observed will play a role in this process, extending human capability beyond physical limits. Some scholars have explored the idea that tool use not only improved survival, but also shaped the way humans thought. The act of planning, creating, and using tools may have influenced cognitive development, encouraging problem-solving and abstract thinking. As you stand there watching the group prepare, this idea feels less like theory and more like something you can sense. The careful observation, the quiet communication, the shared focus. All of it points to a way of thinking that is already deeply human. And yet, despite this capability, the larger mystery still lingers. If these people were so adaptable, so aware, so capable of shaping their environment in small but meaningful ways, what could have caused such a dramatic narrowing of their population? You look at them again, at their tools, their movements, their quiet cooperation. They do not appear fragile, but perhaps fragility is not always visible. Perhaps it exists in the balance between what is known and what is changing beyond perception. You take a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the day settle gently around you. The group begins to move again, following signs that only they fully understand. And you follow with them, carrying a deeper awareness now, that every small action, every carefully shaped tool is part of a larger story, one that continues to unfold even as the world itself begins to shift. You continue moving with the group as the sun reaches its quiet height and the warmth of the day settles evenly across the land. The air feels steady now, neither cold nor hot, and the ground beneath your feet carries a gentle firmness that makes each step feel grounded and calm. Nothing in the scene suggests urgency, nothing appears broken or threatened, and yet this is where something unusual begins to emerge. To understand it, you shift your awareness from the immediate world around you to something far less visible, something that cannot be seen in the movement of people or the shape of the land. It exists instead in the deep structure of life itself, within patterns that only much later would be uncovered through science. In modern research, genetic studies have revealed that all humans alive today share a surprisingly limited amount of variation. When scientists examine DNA from populations across the world, they find evidence suggesting that at some point in the distant past, the human population may have dropped to a very small number. This phenomenon is often described as a genetic bottleneck. It does not mean that every person disappeared, but rather that the diversity of the population became sharply reduced as if a wide river had been forced through a narrow channel. The result is that many genetic differences were lost, leaving behind a more uniform population from which all later humans would descend. You stand quietly watching the group ahead of you, and it becomes difficult to reconcile this idea with what you see. They move with quiet confidence. They appear healthy, capable, present in their environment. There is no visible sign of decline, and yet the genetic evidence suggests that somewhere within this era something changed. Some researchers estimate that the number of breeding individuals may have dropped to only a few thousand. Others argue that the decline may not have been quite so severe, suggesting that the genetic signal could reflect complex patterns of migration and isolation rather than a single dramatic event. The discussion remains open, shaped by new data and differing interpretations. As you walk, you begin to notice something subtle in the behavior of the group. It is not fear, not exactly, but there is a heightened awareness, a careful attention to surroundings that feels slightly more focused than before. Individuals glance more often toward the horizon. Movements are a little more deliberate. It's not something that would stand out on its own, but when you are watching closely it becomes noticeable. You follow as the group approaches a narrow passage between low rock formations. The space feels more enclosed, offering a sense of shelter but also limiting visibility. The group slows their pace, adjusting naturally as they move through the tighter space. This is where the balance of survival becomes more apparent. Living in small groups has advantages. It allows for flexibility, for quiet movement, for efficient use of resources, but it also carries risks. If a group becomes too small, the loss of even a few individuals can have significant consequences. Skills can be lost. Knowledge can fade. The ability to recover becomes more difficult. Some scientists suggest that this is one of the key factors behind the genetic patterns we see today. Not necessarily a single catastrophic event, but a combination of pressures that reduced population sizes across multiple regions. You pause for a moment, letting that idea settle. It is not always one dramatic moment that changes everything. Sometimes it is a gradual narrowing, a slow reduction, a quiet thinning of numbers that goes almost unnoticed, until it has already taken hold. You continue walking and the land opens again on the other side of the rocks. The light feels softer here, filtered slightly by the terrain. The group spreads out a little, returning to a more relaxed formation. You notice a pair of individuals examining the ground closely. They are not searching randomly. Their attention is focused, guided by patterns that are not immediately obvious to you. Tracks, perhaps. Signs of movement. Indicators of where food might be found. Even in this moment, life continues as it always has. Searching, adapting, responding, and yet the larger question remains. What caused this narrowing? One possibility often discussed is environmental change. During the late Pleistocene, the climate was not stable. Shifts in temperature and rainfall could alter entire ecosystems, affecting the availability of plants and animals. A region that once supported life could become less reliable, forcing groups to move or face scarcity. Another idea points toward geographic isolation. As groups spread out across vast areas, they may have become separated from one another, reducing interaction and interbreeding. Over time, this could create patterns in genetic data that resemble a bottleneck, even if populations were not drastically reduced everywhere. There are also more dramatic theories which you will encounter later, suggesting that rare but powerful events may have played a role. But here in this quiet moment, none of that is visible. You see only the present, the careful movement of people, the subtle reading of the land, the steady continuation of life. You might find yourself wondering how much they understood about the challenges they faced. Did they notice changes in the environment over time? Did they sense that resources were becoming less predictable? Some researchers believe that early humans were highly attuned to their surroundings, capable of detecting even small shifts in patterns. Others suggest that while they adapted effectively, they may not have perceived the broader trends shaping their world. The truth is, with so much from this era, remains uncertain. You walk a little further, feeling the ground shift slightly beneath your feet as the terrain changes again. The air carries a faint dryness, now hinting at conditions that may not always be stable. The group continues forward, unaware of the future, unaware of the genetic traces they will leave behind, unaware that their survival, their simple continuation, will become one of the most important turning points in human history. And as you follow them, step by quiet step, you begin to understand that this moment, so calm and unremarkable on the surface, sits at the edge of something far more fragile than it appears. Not a sudden collapse, not an obvious but a narrowing, a quiet thinning of humanity itself. You continue forward with the group as the light of the day begins to soften slightly, shifting toward a quieter tone that settles gently across the land. The air feels still, almost suspended, as if the world itself is holding its breath in a way that is difficult to explain. There is no visible danger, no immediate change in the behavior of those around you, and yet something distant begins to enter your awareness, not through sight, not through sound, but through a subtle shift in the story you are walking through. To understand this moment, you need to look far beyond the horizon, far beyond anything these early humans could possibly perceive. Nearly 74,000 years ago, on an island that will one day be known as Sumatra, a massive volcanic eruption took place at a location now called Lake Toba. This event, often referred to as the Toba super eruption, is considered one of the largest volcanic events in the last 2 million years. Geological evidence shows that enormous quantities of ash were released into the atmosphere, spreading across vast distances. Layers of this ash have been found in regions thousands of kilometers away, forming a record that scientists continue to study carefully. You pause for a moment, trying to connect that distant eruption with the quiet world around you. At first, it seems impossible. Nothing here suggests catastrophe. The sky above you is clear. The land is steady. The group continues to move with calm purpose. And yet the connection exists hidden in the slow and complex systems of the Earth. When a volcanic eruption of this scale occurs, it does not only affect the immediate area. Fine particles can rise high into the atmosphere, spreading across the globe and reflecting sunlight away from the surface. This can lead to a cooling effect, sometimes described as a volcanic winter, where temperatures drop and growing conditions become more difficult. Some researchers propose that the Toba eruption may have triggered such a cooling period lasting several years or even longer. In this view, the eruption could have placed additional stress on already vulnerable human populations, contributing to the genetic narrowing you have begun to sense. But the picture is not so simple. Other scientists have examined environmental records from different regions and found evidence suggesting that the impact may not have been as severe everywhere. Some areas appear to show continuity rather than disruption, raising questions about how widespread the effects truly were. This difference in interpretation remains one of the most intriguing aspects of the story. You continue walking, letting these ideas settle quietly in your mind even as the group around you remains grounded in the present moment. They do not know about distant volcanoes. They do not measure atmospheric particles. They do not track global temperatures. And yet they are a real part of a system that connects all of these things. You notice a faint change in the quality of light as the afternoon progresses. It is not dramatic, not something that would draw attention immediately, but there is a slight softness, a subtle filtering that makes the sunlight feel less direct. It could be nothing, or it could be the faintest trace of something much larger. You walk alongside one of the individuals as they pause to examine a patch of ground. The vegetation here seems thinner, less vibrant than in earlier areas you pass through. It is a small difference, easy to overlook, but when you begin to notice it in multiple places, it starts to form a pattern. The group adjusts its movement again, spreading out slightly, searching more carefully. There is no alarm, only adaptation. This is how change is experienced in this world. Not as sudden disaster, but as gradual adjustment. You might find yourself wondering how long it would take for such changes to be fully understood by those living through them. Without written records, without long-term measurements, the only way to perceive change is through memory and comparison. A place that once had more plants, a season that feels slightly colder, an animal that appears less frequently. These are the clues, and they are subtle. You notice that the group is quieter now, not in fear, but in focus. Movements are more deliberate. Attention is directed outward, scanning the environment with quiet concentration. It is possible that this kind of awareness was always present, but now it feels more pronounced, more necessary. You take a slow breath, feeling the air as it moves across your skin. There is a dryness to it, a faint sharpness that was not as noticeable before. The wind, when it comes, feels thinner, carrying less moisture. These are small details, but they matter. You continue forward and the land begins to slope gently downward, revealing a broader view of the surrounding area. From this vantage point, you can see patches of vegetation interspersed with more barren stretches. The pattern is uneven, as if the land itself is shifting between abundance and scarcity. The group pauses again. They are reading this landscape in ways that you are only beginning to understand. Some researchers suggest that early humans were highly sensitive to environmental signals, capable of detecting patterns that would be invisible to someone unfamiliar with the land. This sensitivity may have been one of the key factors that allowed them to survive periods of change. But even the most careful awareness has limits. If conditions shift beyond a certain point, adaptation becomes more difficult. You glance back toward the direction you came from, imagining the vast distance that separates this place from the source of that ancient eruption. It is almost impossible to grasp the scale of it, and yet here you are. Walking through its possible consequences, you return your attention to the group as they begin to move again, choosing a path that leads toward a slightly greener area in the distance. The decision is quite unspoken but shared. Life continues. It always does. But now there is a new layer to your understanding, that beneath the calm surface of daily existence, forces far beyond immediate perception can shape the course of human history. Not always in obvious ways. Not always with clear beginnings or endings. Sometimes through slow and subtle shifts that ripple outward across time. You follow the group as they descend the gentle slope, the light continuing to soften around you. And in that quiet-filtered sunlight, you begin to sense just how fragile this balance truly is. You move with the group into the lower ground where the land feels slightly more enclosed, and the air carries a different texture. It is not a dramatic change, but something softer, more muted. The sunlight that reaches you now feels thinner, as if filtered through something distant and unseen. You notice it most when you lift your gaze toward the sky. The brightness is still there, but it lacks the sharp clarity you felt earlier. To place this moment within a broader understanding, scientists have found layers of volcanic ash spread across parts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, all tracing back to the massive eruption at Lake Toba. These layers act like quiet markers in the earth, preserving a record of an event that reached far beyond its origin. Fine particles released into the atmosphere during such eruptions can travel great distances. Once there, they can remain suspended for extended periods, subtly altering how sunlight reaches the surface. This does not always create darkness in an obvious sense. Instead, it can produce a softer, dimmer quality of light, one that is easy to overlook unless you are paying close attention. You begin to understand that what you are sensing now may not be a single moment of change, but part of a longer process. The group continues forward, their movement steady but more measured. You notice how often they pause now, scanning the ground, the horizon, the spaces between plants. Their attention seems to linger a little longer on each detail. You follow their gaze and begin to see it as well. The vegetation here is uneven. Some patches appear healthy, while others seem sparse, as if growth has been interrupted. The soil feels drier underfoot, and when the wind moves across the land, it lifts small traces of dust that drift briefly before settling again. These are not signs of immediate danger, but they are signs of change. You walk beside one of the individuals as they kneel to examine a cluster of plants. Their hands move gently through the leaves, testing, selecting, discarding. The process is careful, deliberate. Not every plant is useful. Not every resource is reliable. In this period, gathering plant food was a crucial part of survival. While hunting often draws more attention in modern imagination, many early human diets depended heavily on plant resources. Roots, seeds, fruits and leaves provided consistent nourishment when available. An overlooked detail is that some plant foods required processing before they could be eaten safely. Certain roots needed to be cooked to remove toxins, and seeds often had to be ground or prepared in specific ways. This required knowledge, patience, and access to fire. You notice how the individual selects only a small number of items before standing again. There is no abundance here. Every choice is weighed against need and effort. The group regathers and continues moving, adjusting their path once more. Their route is not straight. It curves gently, responding to what they observe in the land. This flexibility is essential. A fixed plan would not serve them well in a world that is constantly shifting. You take a slow breath, feeling the air more clearly now. There is a faint dryness, a subtle sharpness that lingers in the throat. It's not uncomfortable, but it is noticeable. You might wonder how long such conditions could persist. Some studies suggest that after a major eruption like Toba, environmental effects could last for years, even decades in some regions. Reduced sunlight could impact plant growth, which in turn affects the animals that depend on those plants, and eventually the humans who rely on both. But again, the extent of this impact is still uncertain. Evidence from different regions does not always align. Some areas show clear signs of disruption while others appear more stable. This has led researchers to consider the possibility that the effects were uneven, creating pockets of difficulty alongside areas of relative continuity. As you walk, this idea begins to feel more tangible. The land around you is not uniformly barren, nor is it fully abundant. It exists somewhere in between. You notice a faint sound in the distance, something soft and irregular. The group reacts almost immediately, though without alarm. They shift direction slightly, moving toward the source with quiet intention. As you follow, the sound becomes clearer. It is the movement of water. A narrow stream comes into view, its surface reflecting the softened light in gentle patterns. The water is not large, but it is steady, flowing with quiet persistence across the land. The group approaches, carefully scanning the surrounding area before stepping closer. Water sources are valuable, but they can also attract other animals. Awareness remains constant. You kneel near the edge, watching as one individual cups their hands to drink. The water looks clear, though slightly darker than what you might expect. Sediment drifts slowly within it, carried along by the current. Water during this period could vary greatly in quality. Without modern filtration, early humans relied on natural sources, often choosing flowing water over still pools to reduce the risk of contamination. Even so, illness would have been a real concern, though difficult to detect in the archaeological record. The group takes only what they need, drinking, filling small containers made from natural materials, and then stepping back. There is no lingering. Time and energy must be managed carefully. You stand and look around, noticing how the presence of water changes the immediate environment. The vegetation here is slightly more dense. The air feels marginally cooler. Small insects move near the surface, and faint tracks in the mud suggest that animals have passed through recently. Life persists, even under strain. You begin to understand that survival in this period is not about avoiding change. It is about moving within it, adapting constantly, responding without hesitation. The group begins to move again, leaving the stream behind. Their pace is steady, their direction guided by a combination of memory and observation. You follow, carrying with you a deeper awareness of the subtle shifts shaping this world. The dimmed light, the uneven growth, the quiet dryness in the air. None of it announces itself as a crisis, but together it forms a pattern that suggests something larger is unfolding. And as you continue walking through this softened, altered landscape, you begin to sense that this is how major changes often appear in the human story. Not as sudden events, but as quiet transformations that unfold over time, shaping lives in ways that are only fully understood much later. You continue along the faint line of movement left by the group, and as the day stretches further, the landscape begins to feel more demanding. The ground grows harder in places, and the spaces between patches of vegetation widen just enough to be noticed. It is not emptiness, but it is less generous than before. To understand what you are witnessing, it helps to remember that even small environmental shifts can have wide effects. When plant growth becomes less reliable, animals begin to change their patterns. They move differently, gather in new areas, or become less frequent. For early humans, this creates a quiet challenge. Food is still there, but it is no longer predictable. You notice the group slowing again, their formation spreading slightly as they scan the ground ahead. A few individuals crouch low, studying faint tracks pressed into the soil. The impressions are shallow, not fresh, but not fully erased either. They tell a story that only careful eyes can read. You kneel beside them, trying to follow what they see. The marks curve gently, suggesting movement over time rather than a quick passing. An animal, perhaps several moving through this area hours earlier, maybe longer. This is where patience becomes essential. Hunting in this period is not about speed or force. It is about persistence, about understanding the movement of animals across the land and positioning yourself carefully within that flow. Early humans often relied on endurance, following prey over long distances, rather than rushing toward a quick capture. Some research suggests that humans developed a unique ability for long-distance tracking and sustained movement, allowing them to outlast certain animals in extended pursuits. It is a quiet advantage, one that does not rely on strength alone. You rise slowly as the group begins to follow the tracks. Their pace is steady, unhurried, conserving energy. Every step is placed with intention, avoiding unnecessary noise, avoiding wasted effort. You move with them, feeling the warmth of the day pressing gently against your skin. The air is dry now, carrying a faint dust that settles lightly with each step. The softened light from a lyre remains, giving everything a slightly muted tone. Time passes in a way that feels different here. There is no clear marker for how long you have been walking. The rhythm of movement replaces the sense of hours. The body adjusts, finding a steady pace that can be maintained without strain. Eventually the group slows again. You see it before you hear anything. A small cluster of animals grazing in the distance. Their forms are faint but distinct against the lighter ground. They move slowly, unaware of the quiet attention focused on them. The group lowers slightly, using the natural shape of the land to remain less visible. There is no spoken plan, but there is coordination. Each individual adjusts their position in relation to the others, forming a loose pattern that reflects shared understanding. You feel the tension, but it is not sharp or sudden. It is controlled, measured. This is not a moment of chaos. It is a moment of focus. You might expect a quick rush, a sudden movement toward the animals, but that's not what happens. Instead, the group waits. They observe. They allow the situation to unfold. This approach reflects a deeper strategy. Rather than forcing an outcome, they position themselves so that the animals may move in a direction that creates opportunity. It requires time, patience, and trust in the process. There is also a quieter detail that often goes unnoticed. Not every hunt succeeds. In fact, many likely ended without capture. This means that energy spent must always be balanced against potential gain. A failed attempt is not just disappointment. It is a cost. You watch as one individual shifts slightly, guiding the group's movements almost imperceptibly. Others respond, adjusting without hesitation. It is a form of communication that relies on awareness rather than words. Moments pass. The animals begin to move, not away in panic, but slowly following their own instincts, drifting into a position that brings them closer to where the group has settled. You feel your breath slow, matching the rhythm of the scene. The land is quiet, the air still. Even the wind seems to pause, and then in a controlled and coordinated motion the group moves. Not with noise, not with sudden bursts, but with steady precision. The distance closes gradually, each step reducing the space between human and animal. You do not see the full outcome. The scene shifts gently, allowing the moment to remain calm rather than intense. What matters is not the final act, but the process that led to it. Hunting provided an important source of protein and fat, both essential for survival, especially in environments where plant resources were limited. Evidence from ancient sites shows that early humans were capable of processing animal remains efficiently, using tools to extract as much value as possible. You notice after some time that the group regathers. Their movement suggests success, though it is not celebrated with noise or display. Instead, there is a quiet sense of completion. Food means stability, even if only for a short time. You walk with them as they return to a more sheltered area where the work of preparing the catch begins. Tools are used carefully, separating usable parts, preserving what can be carried, leaving behind what cannot. Nothing is wasted. This careful use of resources reflects a deep understanding of necessity. In a world where availability can shift quickly, efficiency becomes a form of security. You might reflect on how different this is from modern life, where abundance often allows for excess. Here, every part of the process is deliberate. The group works together, each person contributing in small ways. There is no rush, no raised voices, only the steady rhythm, effort. And yet even within this moment of relative success, the larger uncertainty remains. Food has been found today, but what about tomorrow? What about the next week? What about the next season? These questions are not spoken, but they exist quietly in every action. You sit nearby, feeling the warmth of the afternoon beginning to soften as the sun slowly lowers. The light becomes more golden now, stretching shadows across the ground. The world feels calm again, stable, almost reassuring. But you know now that this stability is not permanent. It is something that must be maintained day by day through careful movement awareness and cooperation. And as you watch the group continue their work, you begin to understand that survival during this time is not a single achievement. It is a continuous process, a balance that must be held moment by moment in a world that is slowly becoming less predictable. You continue with the group as the day begins its slow descent toward evening, and the light stretches longer across the ground, softening everything it touches. Shadows grow taller, moving gently beside you, and the warmth that carried you through the afternoon begins to fade in small, almost unnoticeable steps. The land ahead feels more open again, but not in the same way as before. There is a quiet difference now, something that settles into your awareness the longer you walk. The air feels slightly cooler than it should for this time of day, and when the wind passes across your skin, it carries a faint sharpness that lingers a little longer than expected. To understand this shift, it helps to look at the broader patterns of climate during this period. The late Pleistocene was marked by cycles of warming and cooling often occurring over thousands of years, but sometimes shifting more quickly. These changes influenced everything from the spread of vegetation to the movement of animals and the availability of water. You begin to notice how these larger patterns translate into the details around you. The ground beneath your feet shows signs of dryness in places where moisture might once have lingered. Small cracks appear in patches of soil, subtle but present. The vegetation is uneven, with some areas maintaining growth while others appear thinner, less vibrant. You glance toward the horizon where distant shapes suggest a landscape that is not entirely stable. Some regions seem richer, others more sparse. It is a patchwork, a shifting balance between abundance and limitation. The group responds to this in quiet ways. Their pace remains steady, but their attention is more focused. They pause more frequently, scanning the environment with careful eyes. Decisions are made without words, guided by shared experience and a deep familiarity with the land. You might find yourself wondering how they interpret these changes. Do they notice the difference from one season to the next? Do they remember places that once offered more, now offering less? Or do they simply adapt, adjusting without needing to define the change in clear terms? Some researchers believe that early humans were highly sensitive to environmental variation, capable of detecting patterns over time through repeated experience. Others suggest that while they responded effectively, their understanding remained local, focused on immediate conditions rather than long-term trends. The truth likely exists somewhere in between. You walk alongside the group as they approach a slightly elevated area. From here, the view opens outward, revealing a broader stretch of land. The colours are muted, softened by the filtered light that has become more noticeable as the day progresses. The sky itself appears faintly different now. Not darker, not cloudy, but less clear than before. It is a subtle shift, one that might go unnoticed if you were not paying close attention. You take a slow breath and the air feels cooler as it moves through you. The change is gentle, but it carries a quiet persistence. The group pauses at the top of the rise, taking in the view. You sense that this moment is not just rest, but assessment. They are reading the land, gathering information that will guide their next movement. In this period, movement decisions were influenced by a combination of factors. Water sources, plant availability, animal presence, and shelter all played a role. A slight change in any one of these could shift the balance. An often overlooked aspect of this process is how memory shapes decision-making. Early humans likely relied on collective memory shared across individuals to recall where resources had been found in the past. This memory was not written, but carried in the mind, reinforced through repeated journeys. You notice one individual pointing subtly toward a distant area where the land dips again. Others follow the gesture, their attention aligning. The decision is made quietly. They begin to move. You follow, feeling the gradual cooling of the air as the sun lowers further. The warmth fades, replaced by a more neutral temperature that hints at the cold to come after sunset. The ground here feels firmer, more compacted, as if it has received less recent moisture. Each step produces a faint dry sound, different from the softer textures you encountered earlier. You begin to understand that these small changes are part of a larger pattern. A shift in climate does not announce itself all at once. It appears in fragments, in the way the air feels, in the way the ground responds, in the way plants grow or fail to grow. You notice a small cluster of animals in the distance moving slowly across the landscape. Their presence suggests that life continues, but their numbers seem fewer than you might expect in such an open space. The group watches them briefly, then continues on. Not every opportunity can be pursued. Energy must be conserved, especially when conditions are uncertain. This restraint is part of their survival. Knowing when not to act is just as important as knowing when to move. You walk quietly, letting the rhythm of the group guide you. The sound of footsteps, the soft movement of air, the occasional distant call of an animal all blend into a steady background that feels almost meditative. And yet beneath this calm, the question remains. What happens when these small shifts continue? When the cooling deepens? When the dryness spreads? When the balance tips just enough to make survival more difficult? You look at the group again, at their steady movement, their quiet cooperation. They do not appear alarmed. They do not show signs of distress. But they are adapting, constantly, subtly. You take another slow breath, feeling the cooler air settle around you as the sun dips closer to the horizon. The light becomes warmer in colour even as the temperature drops, creating a gentle contrast that feels both calm and slightly unfamiliar. The group continues forward, following a path shaped not by certainty but by experience. And you follow with them, carrying a growing awareness that this world, while still functioning, is beginning to change in ways that will shape everything that comes after. Not through sudden events, but through steady, quiet transformation. You continue descending with the group as evening approaches, and the land begins to take on a softer, more muted tone. The warmth of the day fades gently, replaced by a cooler air that settles across your skin with a quiet persistence. The light stretches thin now, lingering just above the horizon, turning the landscape into a calm blend of shadow and fading gold. The group slows again, not from exhaustion but from awareness. This place feels different. You notice it in the silence first. Not a complete absence of sound, but a thinning of it. Fewer distant calls, less movement in the grass. The world feels quieter in a way that is difficult to define. To understand this, you shift your attention to a broader pattern that extends far beyond this single moment. When environmental conditions begin to change, the effects are rarely isolated. They ripple outward, influencing plants, animals, and eventually the humans who depend on both. You begin to notice how this quiet is part of that pattern. The group spreads slightly, each individual scanning the area with careful attention. There is no sign of alarm, only a heightened focus that feels more deliberate than before. You follow their gaze and begin to see what they see. The land here shows fewer signs of recent activity. The ground holds fewer tracks. The vegetation appears less disturbed, not because it is thriving, but because less has moved through it. This absence becomes a kind of presence. You kneel near a patch of soil, noticing how smooth it is compared to earlier areas. The surface is lightly textured by wind, but there are no fresh impressions, no overlapping signs of passing animals. It is a small detail, but when repeated across a larger area, it begins to form a clear signal. Life is less concentrated here. You rise slowly, feeling the cool air settle more deeply now. The group gathers again, and you sense a quiet decision forming among them. This is not a place to remain for long. In this period, human populations were already sparse, spread across vast distances, with little direct contact between groups. Unlike later periods where communities grew and connected through trade and shared networks, early humans often lived in isolation, moving within limited ranges. This means that encounters with other human groups would have been rare. You pause, letting that idea settle. The absence you feel in this place is not just about animals. It may also reflect the absence of other people. Some genetic studies suggest that during this era, human populations became highly fragmented, with small groups separated by large distances. This isolation could have reduced interaction and exchange, leading to a decrease in genetic diversity over time. At the same time, there is ongoing discussion about how extreme this separation truly was. Some findings indicate continuity in certain regions, suggesting that not all populations were equally affected. The picture remains complex, shaped by limited evidence and ongoing interpretation. As you walk, this complexity feels real. The land is not empty, but it is quieter. You notice how the group adjusts its behavior in response. Their movements become more efficient, more direct. There is less wandering, less exploration. Every step seems guided by purpose. You might wonder how they carry knowledge of where to go next. Without maps, without markers, without written records, the answer lies in memory, but not just individual memory, shared memory. Experiences passed between people reinforced through repetition shaped by observation. A place remembered for water, a path remembered for safety, a region avoided because it offered too little. These memories form an invisible map carried within the group. You follow as they move toward a slightly more sheltered area where low rock formations break the open space. The ground here feels different, more stable, less exposed to wind. It offers a small sense of protection, even if only temporary. The group begins to prepare for the night. You watch as they gather materials, again building a fire with the same careful attention you've seen before. The ember carried from earlier is placed gently among dry fibers, and with patience the flame returns. The light spreads outward, creating a small circle of warmth in the growing darkness. You sit nearby feeling the heat against your hands, the contrast between warmth and cold becoming more noticeable as the air cools further. The smell of smoke returns familiar now, almost comforting, but the quiet of the surrounding land remains. It presses gently at the edges of the firelight, a reminder of the wider world beyond this small circle. You notice how closely the group stays together tonight. There is less distance between individuals, more shared space, as if the presence of one another carries added importance. It is not fear, it is awareness. In a world where numbers may already be limited, where encounters with others are rare, the group itself becomes more significant. Each person holds knowledge, skill, and connection that cannot be easily replaced. You might reflect on how different this feels from modern life, where large populations create a sense of constant presence. Here, presence is rare, and therefore valuable. You look out beyond the firelight into the darkness that has fully settled across the land. The sky above is clear again, though the stars feel slightly dimmer than before, softened by whatever remains suspended in the distant atmosphere. The world continues, but something has shifted, not dramatically, not visibly in a single moment, but gradually across time. You feel it in the quiet, in the absence of movement, in the careful way the group holds itself together. And as you sit there watching the fire flicker against the dark, you begin to understand that this lost age is not defined by a single event. It is defined by what is missing. Missing. By what has grown less common, by the spaces between things. You take a slow breath, letting the calm settle around you. The fire crackles softly. The group rests, and beyond them the land stretches outward, quieter than before, holding its changes in silence. You remain beside the fire as night settles fully into place, and the quiet around you deepens into something almost complete. The land beyond the circle of light fades into soft darkness, and the air grows cooler with each passing moment. The group rests close together, their shapes outlined gently by the low glow of the flames. As you sit there, your awareness begins to shift, again not outward across the landscape this time, but forward through time itself. Because what you are witnessing now, this quiet thinning of life, this subtle narrowing of presence, is something that modern science has only begun to understand through a very different kind of evidence. Not tools, not bones, but something far smaller. Within the cells of every human alive today lies a record of the past carried in strands of DNA that stretch back across thousands of generations. This genetic material holds patterns, variations, and connections that allow researchers to trace how populations have changed over time. When scientists began studying human DNA in detail, they noticed something unusual. Compared to many other species, humans show relatively low genetic diversity. In simple terms, this means that people across the world are more genetically similar to one another than might be expected for a species with such a wide global presence. This discovery raised an important question. Why? One explanation that emerged is the idea that human populations experienced a significant reduction at some point in the past, leaving behind a smaller pool of genetic variation from which all later humans would descend. You look at the group before you, again their faces lit softly by the fire, their movements calm and familiar. It's difficult to imagine that their existence could be part of such a narrow thread, and yet the evidence suggests that it may be so. You notice one individual adjusting their position, wrapping themselves more tightly in an animal hide. The texture catches the firelight, revealing subtle patterns formed through use and time. These small details preserved in material culture are one way we understand the past. But DNA tells a different story, a deeper one. It reveals connections between populations separated by vast distances. It shows how certain traits persist while others disappear, and it allows scientists to estimate when changes in population size may have occurred. Some genetic models suggest that during this period the effective population size of humans may have dropped to only a few thousand individuals. This does not mean that only a few thousand people existed in total, but rather that the number of individuals contributing to the next generation became limited. There are still many questions surrounding these findings. Different models produce different estimates, and the interpretation of genetic data is complex. Some researchers point out that patterns in DNA can be influenced by migration isolation and other factors, not just population decline. So the picture remains open, layered, unresolved. You sit quietly, letting that uncertainty exist without needing to resolve it. The fire crackles softly, sending small sparks upward that vanish almost as soon as they appear. The sound is steady, almost rhythmic, blending with the faint movement of air across the land. You might wonder how something as invisible as genetic change could shape the future so profoundly. But here in this moment, it is not visible at all. There is no sign of it in the way people move, no indication in the way they speak, no hint in the simple act of sitting beside a fire. And yet within them, the future is already forming. You notice a child shifting in their sleep, their breathing slow and even. An adult nearby adjusts slightly, maintaining a quiet closeness that feels both protective and natural. These small interactions carry meaning beyond the moment. They represent continuity, the passing of life from one generation to the next. You might reflect on how fragile that continuity can be. In a small group, the loss of even a few individuals can have lasting effects. Skills may disappear, knowledge may fade, connections may weaken. This is especially true in a world where groups are isolated, where interaction with others is rare. Some researchers have explored how these conditions could influence genetic patterns. When populations are small and separated, certain traits become more common simply because there are fewer individuals contributing to the gene pool. Over time, this can reduce diversity, not through a single event, but through accumulation. You shift your gaze toward the edge of the firelight where darkness begins to take over. The contrast between light and shadow feels more pronounced now, as if the world itself is divided into what is known and what is not. You take a slow breath, noticing how the air has cooled further. The warmth of the fire feels more necessary now, more central to comfort and rest. The group remains close, their presence forming a kind of quiet reassurance. Even in a world that may be narrowing, connection persists. You might find it calming to think about how these moments, small and ordinary, are part of something much larger. Every shared meal, every quiet night, every careful act of survival contributes to a chain that extends forward through time, a chain that eventually leads to you. You sit there for a while longer, allowing that idea to settle gently. The fire continues to burn, the group rests, and within their stillness, the hidden patterns of human history continue to unfold, carried not in visible form, but within the quiet structure, or need to do to life itself. You remain seated beside the fading fire, and as the night deepens further, the world around you feels almost suspended in stillness. The group rests quietly, their breathing soft and steady, and the glow of the embers casts a gentle, wavering light across the ground. Beyond this small circle, the land disappears into darkness once again. Your attention begins to shift not toward the immediate scene, but toward the many ways modern researchers have tried to understand this moment in human history. The quiet thinning you have been sensing, the subtle narrowing of life, has become the focus of careful study, yet it has not led to a single clear answer. Instead, it has opened a space of thoughtful disagreement. Different lines of evidence point in different directions, and each interpretation offers its own version of what might have happened during this distant period. One line of thinking connects the genetic patterns you have just considered with environmental stress. According to this view, changing climates, shifting ecosystems, and reduced resources may have placed increasing pressure on early human populations. Over time, these pressures could have reduced numbers across multiple regions, leading to the patterns seen in modern DNA. Another perspective places greater emphasis on geographic separation. As human groups spread outward from Africa, they became more isolated from one another. This separation could have limited interaction and interbreeding, creating the appearance of a population reduction, even if total numbers remained higher than some estimates suggest. You sit quietly letting these ideas settle, much like the embers before you. There is no urgency to choose one explanation over another, only a sense of careful exploration. You notice how the fire has shifted its flames, now reduced to a soft glow that pulses gently with the occasional movement of air. The warmth remains, but it is more subtle, requiring you to sit a little closer to feel it fully. In a similar way, the evidence from this period offers warmth without full clarity. It illuminates parts of the story, but not all of it. There are also those who consider the role of rare but powerful events such as the massive eruption you encountered earlier. In this view, sudden disruptions may have acted as tipping points, pushing already vulnerable populations into further decline. Yet even here, the details remain uncertain. Some environmental records suggest continuity in certain areas, while others show signs of disruption. This uneven pattern has led to ongoing discussion about how widely such events were felt, and whether their impact was enough to reshape human populations on a global scale. You might find it interesting that different scientific disciplines approach this question from different angles. Geneticists study DNA patterns. Geologists examine layers of ash and sediment. Archaeologists analyze tools and remains left behind by early humans. Each provides a piece of the puzzle, but no single piece tells the whole story. You glance toward the group again, noticing how peaceful they appear in this moment. There is no indication of the questions that will one day surround their existence. They rest without awareness of the debates that will unfold thousands of years later. And yet their lives are at the center of those questions. You might wonder how much of their experience is forever beyond our reach. Without written records, without direct observation, much of what they felt, what they noticed, what they understood remains unknown. We reconstruct their world through fragments, through careful study of what remains. But there will always be gaps, spaces where certainty fades. You lean slightly closer to the warmth, feeling the cool air press gently at your back. The contrast between heat and cold feels more pronounced now, as if the night itself is drawing in around the small circle of light. The group shifts, occasionally small movements that reflect comfort rather than restlessness. A hand adjusts a covering. A body turns slightly toward the warmth. These quiet actions carry a sense of continuity of life unfolding moment by the moment. You might reflect on how these small details, so ordinary in themselves, are part of a much larger story. The way people sleep, the way they stay warm, the way they remain close to one another, all of these contribute to survival. And survival during this period is not guaranteed. It is maintained, carefully, continuously. You take a slow breath, letting the rhythm of the scene settle into you. The fire glows softly. The air cools steadily. The group remains together. And beyond them, the wider world continues to shift in ways that are only partially understood. You begin to sense that this uncertainty is not a weakness in our understanding, but a reflection of the complexity of the past. The world you are walking through is not simple. It is layered, influenced by countless factors that interact in subtle ways. Climate, geography, population movement, chance events, all of these play a role. And yet even with all this complexity, one truth remains clear. Humanity endured. Somehow, through all of these possible pressures, through all of these uncertain conditions, small groups like the one before you continued to survive. They moved. They adapted. They stayed together. You look at them again, their forms softened by the dim light, their presence steady and real. They are not symbols. They are not theories. They are people, living quietly in a moment that will one day be studied, questioned and interpreted in many different ways. You sit there a little longer, allowing the calm to deepen. The fire continues to fade. The night remains still. And within that stillness, the many possible explanations for this lost age rest side by side, unresolved, yet quietly illuminating the path that led humanity forward. You rise with the group as the first faint light of morning begins to return, and once again the darkness loosens its hold on the land. The air is cool and still, carrying a gentle softness that settles around you as the horizon slowly brightens. The fires burn down to ash, leaving only a faint trace of warmth beneath the surface. The group moves quietly, gathering what little they carry, preparing to continue. There is no hesitation, no sense of attachment to this place. It was a resting point, nothing more. And now, like many before it, it is left behind without ceremony. As you follow, the land begins to shift again, gradually opening toward a broader, flatter expanse. The ground feels slightly different here, firmer in some areas, looser in others, as if shaped by forces that move across it in cycles. In the distance, you begin to see something new, a faint shimmer of light reflecting off what appears to be water. The group adjusts direction, almost immediately, their movement guided by a quiet understanding of what such a place can offer. As you approach, the shape becomes clearer. A wide stretch of shoreline emerges, where land meets water in a gentle, uneven line. The surface is calm, broken only by small ripples that move slowly across it. This is not an ocean in the modern sense you might imagine. Sea levels during this period were significantly lower due to the large volumes of water locked in ice sheets. What you are seeing could be part of an extended coastal plain, a place where land and water interact in ways that will change over time. Coastal regions like this may have played an important role in human survival. They offer a variety of resources: fish, shellfish plants, and access to fresh water in certain conditions. Compared to inland areas where resources could be more unpredictable, coastlines often provided a more stable environment. You notice how the group responds to this place. There is a subtle shift in their movement, a sense of ease. They spread out slightly, exploring the edges of the water, scanning for signs of food. You follow along the shoreline, feeling the ground soften beneath your feet. The soil here is mixed with fine sand and small fragments of shells, creating a texture that feels different from the dry land you crossed earlier. The air carries a faint scent of salt mixed with the cool freshness of water. It is a gentle change, but a noticeable one. You watch as one individual bends near the edge, reaching into the shallow water with careful hands. After a moment, they lift something small, a shell perhaps, or a cluster of edible material clinging to a rock. They examine it briefly, then place it into a simple container. This quiet act reveals something important. Food here does not always require pursuit. Sometimes it can be gathered with patience. In archaeological studies, evidence from coastal sites has shown that early humans may have relied on marine resources more than once believed. Shell middens, ancient piles of discarded shells, suggest repeated use of these environments over long periods. A detail that often goes unnoticed is how reliable such resources can be. While large game may move or disappear, coastal environments can provide consistent access to smaller but steady sources of nutrition. You continue walking, noticing how others in the group follow similar patterns. Some move along the waterline, searching carefully. Others remain slightly inland, scanning for plants or small animals. The group does not cluster tightly here. There is space, and with that space a sense of quiet opportunity. You might find yourself wondering if places like this offered you a kind of refuge during more difficult times. Some researchers have explored this idea, suggesting that coastal regions may have supported human populations when inland conditions became less stable. The combination of diverse resources and relatively predictable access could have allowed small groups to persist even as other areas became more challenging. At the same time, not all coastlines would have been equally favourable. Changes in climate and sea level could alter these environments as well, shifting the balance over time. So once again, the picture remains complex. You walk further along the shore, watching as the light continues to grow. The sun rises slowly, reflecting across the water in soft, shimmering patterns. The scene feels calm, almost peaceful in a way that contrasts with the uncertainty you've been sensing. The group begins to gather again, bringing together what they have found. The collection is modest but meaningful. Small amounts, carefully chosen. Enough for now. You notice how their movements here are less tense, less focused on scarcity. There is still awareness, still care, but also a slight easing that suggests this place offers something more reliable than the land behind you. You sit briefly near the edge of the water, letting your hand brush against its surface. It is cool, steady, moving with a quiet rhythm that feels almost timeless, and you begin to understand how important such places might have been, not as permanent homes, but as points of stability, moments where the constant movement of life could slow even if only briefly. You look out across the water, imagining how far it extends, how many other shores exist beyond your view. The world feels vast, interconnected in ways that these early humans experience without fully knowing. They move within it, adapt to it, rely on it. You stand again as the group prepares to move once more, leaving the shoreline behind. Even here, they do not remain for long. Resources are gathered, but the rhythm of movement continues. Nothing is held too tightly. You follow Siu, feeling the soft ground give way once more to firmer terrain as you step away from the water. The air shifts again, losing some of its moisture, returning to the drier quality you have come to recognize. But something stays with you. The sense that not all places are equal. That within this changing world, certain environments offered a quieter form of resilience. And as you walk forward, you begin to see how these small pockets of stability may have played a role in carrying humanity through a time when so much else was uncertain. You move away from the shoreline with the group, and as the water fades behind you, the air begins to lose its softness. The scent of salt disappears, gradually replaced by the familiar dryness of open land. The ground becomes firmer again, and the sound of your steps returns to that quiet, muted rhythm you have come to recognize. The group travels for some time before slowing once more this time, near a cluster of low rock formations that rise gently from the earth. The stones are weathered and uneven, shaped by countless cycles of wind and temperature. There is a natural opening between them, narrow but deep enough to create a sheltered space within. You follow as they enter. Inside, the air feels different, cooler, stiller, protected from the steady movement of wind. This is not a constructed shelter, but it offers something just as valuable. A place where the outside world presses less directly against those within. Caves and rock shelters like this played an important role during this period. Across many regions, archaeological findings have revealed that early humans made repeated use of such spaces, returning to them over time. These locations provided protection from weather, a stable place to rest, and sometimes even a location for longer stays. You notice how the group responds almost immediately to the space. Their movements relax slightly. Their attention softens. There is no need to scan the horizon, as often no need to adjust constantly to shifting wind or exposure. It's not safety in an absolute sense, but it is relief. You sit near the inner wall, feeling the stone at your back. It is cool to the touch, carrying a faint texture that reflects its age. The light from outside filters in softly, creating a dim, steady glow that replaces the harsher brightness of the open land. One of the individuals begins preparing a new fire near the entrance, where smoke can drift outward without filling the space. The process is familiar now. Careful placement, patient attention, a small flame growing slowly into something stable. The warmth spreads gently through the shelter, contrasting with the coolness of the stone. You might reflect on how important such spaces would have been during times of environmental strain. When conditions outside become less predictable, having a place that offers even a small degree of consistency can make a difference. Some researchers have examined how the use of caves and shelters increased during periods of climatic difficulty, suggesting that early humans sought out environments that could buffer them from change. At the same time, not all caves show continuous use, and the reasons for choosing one shelter over another remain open to interpretation. Access to resources, proximity to water, and even the presence of other groups may have influenced these decisions. You watch as members of the group settle into the space, placing their belongings in familiar arrangements. Tools are set down carefully, hides are spread across the ground. The space begins to take on a temporary sense of structure shaped by repeated actions. There is a subtle comfort in this. Even without permanent homes, patterns emerge. Places become familiar through use. You notice markings along the parts of the stone wall, faint and irregular. They are not clearly defined, not shaped into recognizable images, but they suggest repeated contact. Hands brushing against the surface, tools resting against the stone. Over time, these small interactions leave traces. In some caves discovered in the modern world, early markings and simple forms have been found hinting at the beginnings of symbolic expression. While it is difficult to say whether what you see here carries the same meaning, it reminds you that even in this early period, humans were beginning to interact with their environment in ways that went beyond simple survival. You sit quietly listening to the sounds within the shelter, The crackle of the fire, the soft movement of people adjusting their positions, the faint echo of sound against stone. It feels contained, grounded. The outside world continues, but here it feels distant. You might wonder how long the group will remain in this place. Some shelters were used only briefly, while others became recurring points along seasonal paths. The decision to stay or move would depend on many factors: the availability of food nearby, the presence of water, and the changing conditions of the surrounding land. You notice that the group begins to prepare food again using the tools you observed earlier. The motions are steady and practiced, reflecting knowledge passed through time. There is no way. No excess. Everything is used with care. You watch as a child traces a hand lightly along the stone wall, their fingers moving slowly following the surface. The gesture is simple, but it carries a sense of curiosity, of connection to the space. It is a small moment, but it lingers. You might think about how spaces like this could have shaped human experience in ways that are difficult to measure. The sense of enclosure, the consistent boundaries, the way sound behaves differently within stone. All of these elements create a different kind of awareness, a different way of being present. Outside, the world is iron. Inside it is contained and steady. You take a slow breath, feeling the cooler air within the shelter mix with the warmth of the fire. The contrast is gentle, almost calming. The group remains close, their presence forming a quiet network of connection within the space. And beyond them, beyond the stone, beyond the narrow entrance, the larger world continues to change. But here for a moment, that change feels less immediate, less pressing, as if the shelter itself holds it a distance. You sit there a little longer, allowing the stillness to settle around you. The fire glows steadily. The stone remains cool and unmoving. And within this sheltered space, you begin to understand how even the simplest forms of protection could help carry human life through a time of quiet uncertainty. You remain within the shelter as the fire settles into a steady glow, and the quiet around you begins to feel deeper, more grounded. The stone walls hold the warmth gently, and the air moves less here, creating a stillness that feels almost protective. Outside, the world continues its slow changes, but inside, time seems to soften. The group gathers closer now, forming a loose circle around the fire. Their movements are calm, unhurried, shaped by familiarity rather than urgency. You notice how naturally they arrange themselves, each person finding a place that feels both comfortable and connected to the others. To understand why this closeness matters so much, you begin to consider the role of cooperation in early human life. Living in small groups required constant interaction, shared effort, and mutual awareness. No single individual could manage every task alone. Survival depended on working together in ways that were both flexible and consistent. You watch as one individual passes a prepared piece of food to another without hesitation. There is no visible exchange, no sign of counting or measuring. The act is simple, almost automatic. It reflects a system based on trust rather than strict balance. In many studies of early human societies, researchers have found evidence suggesting that food sharing was a common practice. This behavior may have helped reduce risk, ensuring that even when one individual or subgroup had less success, the group as a whole could continue. A detail that often escapes attention is how this kind of sharing requires more than just resources. It requires a willingness to give even when the future is uncertain. In a world where food is not guaranteed, this kind of cooperation reflects a deeper social structure. You notice how the group maintains a quiet awareness of one another. Small gestures pass between them, a glance, a slight shift in position, a hand adjusting a piece of material for someone nearby. These actions are subtle, but they carry meaning. Communication here is not always spoken. It is felt. You might find yourself wondering how such systems developed. How did early humans learn to cooperate in ways that go beyond immediate self-interest? Some researchers suggest that cooperation provided a clear advantage, increasing the chances of survival for individuals within a group. Others explore the idea that social bonds themselves became a central part of human evolution, shaping behavior in ways that encourage connection and shared responsibility. The answer is not entirely settled, but the pattern is clear. You see it in the way the group moves together, in the way they share, in the way they remain close. You shift slightly, feeling the texture of the ground beneath you. The surface is uneven, softened in places by the presence of hides and natural materials. The warmth from the fire reaches you steadily, now balancing the coolness of the stone walls behind you. The air carries a familiar mix of scents: smoke, earth, and the faint trace of food being prepared. It is a simple combination, but it creates a sense of continuity that feels almost comforting. You notice a quieter interaction nearby. Two individuals sit close, their shoulders nearly touching. They do not speak, but their presence together suggests a bond that goes beyond immediate need. It is not something that can be easily defined, but it is there. Connections like these may have played an important role in maintaining group stability. Strong social ties could help reduce conflict, improve coordination, and support the sharing of knowledge. At the same time, life in small groups could also bring tension. Limited resources, changing conditions, and the constant need for movement could create challenges. How these groups manage such pressures is something that researchers continue to explore, drawing from both archaeological evidence and comparisons with more recent human societies. You sit quietly, letting these ideas settle while the group continues its gentle rhythm around the fire. A child leans closer to an older individual, watching their movements with focused attention. The adult responds not with direct instruction, but with slow, clear actions that can be observed and repeated. Learning happens here through closeness, through shared space, through time spent together. You might reflect on how different this is from modern systems of learning, where information is often separated from daily life. Here, knowledge is woven directly into experience. It is not something you study, it is something you live. You take a slow breath, noticing how the air feels slightly warmer now as the fire continues to hold its strength. Outside, the temperature is likely dropping, but within the shelter, the balance remains steady. The group begins to settle more deeply into rest. Some lie down, adjusting their coverings. Others remain seated, their movements slow and relaxed. The fire becomes the center of attention once again, its glow providing both warmth and a quiet sense of connection. You might consider how essential this shared presence is. In a world where numbers may be limited, where other groups are rarely encountered, the individuals within this circle represent everything: companionship, support, continuity. You look around at their faces softened by the light, their expressions calm and unguarded. There is no sign of the pressures you've been sensing in the wider world, and yet those pressures exist. Beyond the shelter, beyond the fire, the group remains unaware of the large patterns shaping their future. But they respond to what they can feel. They stay close. They share. They move together. And in doing so, they create a form of resilience that is not built on strength alone, but on connection. You sit there a little longer, letting the quiet settle more deeply. The fire glows. The air remains still. The group rests together. And within this small circle of warmth and presence, you begin to understand that cooperation may have been one of the most powerful tools humans ever developed. Not something you can hold in your hand, but something that carries you through. You remain within the shelter as the fire dims to a quieter glow, and the group settles into a deeper stillness. The air is calm, almost unmoving, and the faint sounds of breathing and shifting bodies blend into a gentle rhythm that feels steady and reassuring. Outside, the night continues, but here within these stone walls, everything feels contained. As you sit there, your attention begins to drift towards something less visible than tools or fire or shelter. Something softer but just as important: the way these people communicate. You listen carefully. At first it seems simple. A few soft sounds, gentle tones that rise and fall without clear structure. But the longer you remain, the more you begin to notice patterns. Repetition, variation, subtle changes that carry meaning. This is not silence. It is something in between. To understand this moment, it helps to consider how language may have been developing during this period. By 70,000 years ago, many researchers believe that early humans already possessed the physical ability for complex speech. The structure of the throat, the position of the tongue, and the shape of the vocal tract suggest that a wide range of sounds could be produced. But the exact form of communication remains uncertain. Some suggest that fully developed language with structured grammar and vocabulary may have emerged later. Others believe that complex communication could have been present earlier, perhaps already taking shape in ways that are difficult to reconstruct. You listen again as one individual makes a soft sequence of sounds while gesturing toward a small bundle near the fire. Another responds with a slight nod and a different sound, shorter but clearly connected. There is understanding here. Even if you cannot translate it, you might find yourself wondering what their words, if they can be called, that would feel like. Would they describe objects, actions, places? Would they carry emotion, memory, intention? Or would they exist somewhere between all of these things, shaped by immediate need and shared experience? A lesser-known detail from linguistic research is that communication does not rely on words alone. Gesture tone, facial expression, and body movement all play a role. In early human groups, these elements may have been even more important than spoken sounds. You notice how often hands are used, a slight movement to indicate a direction, a shift in posture to signal attention, a glance that carries meaning without any sound at all. It is a form of communication that feels integrated with the body rather than separate from it. You shift slightly, feeling the cool stone at your side and the warmth of the fire on your hands. The contrast grounds you in the moment, making each detail feel more vivid. The group continues its quiet exchanges, not constant, not overwhelming, just enough to maintain connection. You might reflect on how essential this ability is. Without communication, cooperation would be far more difficult. Hunting, gathering, moving across the land, all of these require coordination. Even small misunderstandings could lead to mistakes. So communication, even in this early form, becomes a tool, not made of stone, not held in the hand, but just as vital. Some researchers have explored the idea that the pressures of survival during this period may have encouraged more advanced communication. As environments became less predictable, the ability to share information quickly and accurately could have provided an advantage. Others suggest that social complexity itself drove the development of language. As groups became more connected, as relationships deepened, the need to express more nuanced ideas may have grown. The exact path remains open to interpretation. But here in this moment, you can feel the presence of something evolving, not fully formed, but clearly moving in that direction. You notice a child watching closely, again their attention fixed on the interactions around them. They mimic a gesture, repeating a sound softly under their breath. It is imperfect, but it carries intention. Learning is happening, quietly, gradually, through observation and repetition. You might find it comforting to realize that this process, this slow shaping of communication, is something that continues even today. Language is not fixed. It changes, adapts, grows. And here you are, witnessing one of its early forms. The fire shifts slightly, a small piece of wood collapsing inward, sending a brief flicker of light across the shelter. Shadows move along the walls, stretching and then settling again. The group grows quieter as rest deepens. Communication fades into stillness, but its presence lingers. You begin to understand that even when words are not spoken, connection remains. It exists in shared space, in mutual awareness, in the simple act of being together. You take a slow breath, feeling the air cool slightly as the fire continues to diminish. The warmth is still there, but softer now, requiring you to stay close to feel it fully. Outside, the world continues its slow transformation. The climate shifts. The land changes. Populations may be thinning in ways no one here can perceive. But within this shelter, another process is unfolding. One that will shape the future just as profoundly. The development of communication. The ability to share ideas. To coordinate. To remember. To pass knowledge forward. You sit quietly, letting that idea settle. That even in a time of uncertainty, even in a period where survival is not guaranteed, something new is taking form. Not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly. Through small exchanges, through repeated gestures, through quiet sounds that carry meaning. And as you remain there, surrounded by the soft glow of the fire and the steady presence of the group, you begin to sense that this emerging ability, this early form of language, may be one of the reasons humanity will continue. Not just to survive, but to understand. You remain in the shelter as the fire settles into its lowest glow, and the quiet stretches deeper into the night. The group rests almost completely now, their movements reduced to small shifts and steady breathing. The air feels calm and balanced, held gently between the cool stone and the fading warmth. And in this stillness, your attention drifts towards something even more subtle. Not movement, not sound, but the beginnings of meaning beyond survival. You notice it first in the way one individual reaches toward the wall again, their fingers brushing across the surface in a slow, deliberate motion. It is not random. There is a pause, a slight pressure, a repeated touch in nearly the same place. You lean closer, observing the faint traces left behind. They are not clear images, not yet, but they are not entirely accidental either. To understand this moment, it helps to consider how symbolic thinking may have begun during this period. At some point in human history, people started to create marks, patterns, and objects that carried meaning beyond immediate function. These early expressions may not have been elaborate, but they represent a shift in how humans related to the world. Archaeological discoveries have revealed simple engravings, ochre markings, and other forms of early symbolic behavior dating back tens of thousands of years. While the exact purpose of these markings remains uncertain, many researchers believe they reflect an emerging ability to represent ideas, memories, or identities. You watch as the individual continues the motion, tracing a line, then pausing, then repeating it again. The action feels intentional, even if its meaning is not fully clear. Nearby, another person glances briefly at the wall, then returns their attention to the fire. There is no reaction of surprise, no interruption. It is simply part of the space. You might find yourself wondering what these marks represent. Are they memory, a place remembered, a pattern that holds meaning within the group? Or are they something else entirely? Something that cannot be easily translated into modern understanding. A lesser discussed detail is that early symbolic behavior does not always take the form of clear images. It can appear as repeated patterns, lines, or shapes that carry significance only within a specific context. What seems simple from a modern perspective may have held layered meaning for those who created it. You shift slightly, feeling the cool stone beneath your hand as you rest it lightly against the wall. The surface is uneven, textured by time. The faint markings blend into that texture, almost disappearing unless you focus closely. It is quiet work, private, not meant to draw attention. You notice a child nearby watching you again, their gaze moving between the hand on the wall and the subtle marks being formed. Slowly, almost hesitantly, they reach out and touch the stone as well, tracing a similar motion. It is not exact, but it is connected, learning once again through observation. You might reflect on how this moment represents something new, not just survival, not just cooperation, but expression. The ability to create something that does not directly feed or protect, but still matters. Some researchers have suggested that symbolic thinking may have played a role in strengthening social bonds. Shared symbols, even simple ones, can create a sense of identity, a way of connecting individuals within a group through common meaning. Others consider the possibility that these earliest expressions were more personal, tied to individual experience rather than group identity. The exact purpose remains open, but the presence of these actions is clear. You sit quietly, letting the moment unfold without interruption. The fire shifts slightly, casting a brief flicker of light across the wall. For an instant, the faint lines become more visible, then fade again into the stone as the light settles. It feels almost like a memory, something that appears, then disappears, leaving only a trace. You take a slow breath, noticing how the air has cooled further. The warmth of the fire is now softer, requiring closeness to feel its full effect. The group remains gathered, their presence steady, their rest deepening, and within this calm, something continues to form. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gradually. The ability to represent, to mark, to remember in a different way. You might find it calming to think about how this small act, this quiet tracing of lines on the stone, connects to something much larger. Over time, such expressions will grow more complex, more detailed, eventually leading to art, to symbols, to systems of communication that carry meaning across generations. But here it is still simple. Still emerging. You look at the individual again as they first simulate the motion, their hand resting briefly against the wall before returning to their side. There is no display, no announcement. The act is complete and life continues as before. And yet something has been added, a trace, a mark, a small piece of meaning placed into the world. You sit there a little longer, allowing the quiet to settle more deeply around you. The fire glows faintly. The group rests. The stone holds its subtle patterns. And within this sheltered space, you begin to understand that even in a time of uncertainty, even as populations may be narrowing and environments shifting, the human mind is expanding in quiet and remarkable ways. Not just surviving, but creating. You leave the shelter with the group as morning returns once more, and the first light spreads gently across the land. The air feels cooler than expected, carrying a faint edge that lingers as you breathe it in. The stone behind you fades quickly as you step back into the open, where the world stretches outward again, wide and quietly shifting. The group moves without hesitation. There is no need to remain where the resources are limited, and the rhythm of movement continues as it always has. You follow closely, feeling the ground beneath your feet change from the firm enclosed space of the shelter to the more open, uneven terrain outside. To better understand this part of the journey, it helps to consider how migration shaped early human life. Movement during this period was not a single event, but a continuous process. Groups expanded, slowly adapting to new environments, adjusting their behavior as conditions changed. You notice how the direction of travel feels purposeful even without visible markers. This is not wandering. It is guided by the knowledge, by memory, by a sense of where conditions may be more favorable. The land ahead begins to rise, gradually forming a gentle slope that leads toward a broader view. As you climb, the air shifts slightly, becoming cooler, more open. The light spreads more evenly here, revealing a landscape that stretches far into the distance. From this vantage point, you can see how varied the terrain truly is. Patches of vegetation, open stretches of bare ground, distant clusters of trees. The pattern is uneven, reflecting a world that does not offer the same resources everywhere. The group pauses briefly, taking in the view. You sense that this is a moment of decision. Where to go next? Which direction offers the best chance of finding what they need? Migration at this scale required constant adjustment. Early humans did not move randomly across the land. Their paths were shaped by experience, by observation, and by the subtle signals of the environment. There is also a broader story unfolding beyond this single group. Around this time, human populations were gradually expanding beyond their earlier ranges. Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that Homo sapiens began moving into new regions, including parts of Asia and beyond. These movements were slow, often taking place over many generations, but they represent an important shift in human history. You look out across the landscape again, imagining how many such journeys were taking place at different times in different directions. Small groups, moving quietly, carrying their knowledge with them. You begin to walk again as the group descends the other side of the slope. The ground here feels slightly different, more compact in some areas, looser in others. Each step produces a faint sound, blending into the steady rhythm of movement. You notice how the groups spread slightly as they move, allowing each person to observe the land more effectively. There is a balance between staying connected and covering enough ground to detect useful signs. A detail that often goes unnoticed is how migration is not only about movement, but also about choice. Every direction taken excludes others. Every path shapes future possibilities. You might find yourself wondering how often these choices led to success, and how often they did not. Some paths may have led to richer environments, others to more difficult conditions, and yet over time enough of these choices led to survival. You continue walking, noticing subtle signs in the land, faint tracks, slight disturbances, variations in plant growth. These details guide the group even if they are not immediately obvious to you. The air carries a quiet dryness again, though not as strong as before. The light remains soft, filtered in a way that continues to hint at something beyond immediate perception. You feel the steady pace of the group, their movement neither rushed nor slow, but balanced in a way that conserves energy. Time passes gently, step after step. The land changes slowly around you. You begin to sense how this process of movement shapes more than just location. It shapes experience, knowledge, identity. As groups move into new areas, they encounter different conditions, different challenges, different opportunities. Over time, these experiences accumulate, creating variations in behavior and skill in understanding. Some researchers have explored how these migrations contributed to the diversity of human cultures that would emerge later. Even in this early period, the seeds of variation may have been forming, shaped by the environments people move through. At the same time, movement also carries risk. Entering unfamiliar territory means encountering unknown conditions. Water sources may be unreliable, food may be scarce, predators may be present in new ways. The group moves forward anyway, because staying in one place is not always an option. You take a slow breath, feeling the air shift slightly as the day progresses. The temperature remains moderate, but there is a subtle unpredictability to it, as if the balance could change without warning. The group continues their direction, now leading toward a distant area where the land appears slightly greener. It is not a guarantee, but it is a possibility, and in this world possibility is enough. You follow, feeling the rhythm of movement settle more deeply into your body. There is something calming about it. The steady pace, the quiet awareness, the absence of urgency even in uncertainty. You begin to understand that migration during this period is not just a response to change. It is a way of living within it, adapting continuously, adjusting without resistance. And as you walk alongside the group, moving across a landscape that is both familiar and shifting, you realize that this quiet journey, repeat across generations, is one of the ways humanity continues, not through stillness, but through movement. You continue forward with the group as the land stretches into a quieter openness, and the light of the day settles into a soft, even glow. The ground feels familiar again beneath your feet, a mix of firm soil and scattered growth shaped by wind and time. The rhythm of walking has become almost effortless now, each step blending into the next. But as you move, something new begins to enter your awareness. Not a change in the land, not a shift in the air, but a presence, subtle at first, easy to miss. You notice it in the way one member of the group slows slightly their attention, turning towards a distant area where the terrain dips and rises again. Others follow their gaze, their movements becoming more focused, more deliberate. There is no alarm, but there is recognition. To understand this moment helps to consider that Homo sapiens were not alone in the world during this time. Other human species existed alongside them, occupying overlapping regions and sometimes encountering one another. Among these were the Neanderthals, known today as Neanderthals, who lived across parts of Europe and Western Asia. There were also other groups such as the Denisovans, whose presence has been identified primarily through genetic evidence rather than complete fossil remains. These were not entirely separate beings in the way different animal species might be imagined. They shared a common ancestry with Homo sapiens and possessed many similar traits, including tool use, control of fire, and complex social behavior. You walk more slowly now, following the group's cautious shift in direction. The land ahead holds faint signs of recent activity. Tracks, but not quite like the ones you have seen before. They are subtle, partially worn by time and movement, but they carry a different pattern, a slightly different spacing, a variation in depth and form. You kneel briefly examining them. They are human, but not quite the same. You feel a quiet tension settle into the space around you, though it remains controlled, measured. The group does not react with fear, but with awareness. Encounters between different human groups during this period are difficult to reconstruct in detail. Some evidence suggests that interactions may have included competition for resources. Other findings, especially from genetic studies, indicate that interbreeding occurred, leaving traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in modern human populations. This suggests that not all encounters were hostile. Some may have been cooperative, or at least neutral. You rise slowly as the group begins to move again, adjusting their path slightly to follow the terrain in a way that offers both visibility and cover. You sense that they are not seeking contact, but they are not entirely avoiding it either. They are aware, and that awareness shapes their movement. You follow as they move along the edge of a low ridge where the land provides a clearer view of the surrounding area. From here you can see a broader stretch of terrain, and in the distance a faint movement catches your eye. It is brief, almost imperceptible, but it is there. Another group, far enough away that details are lost but close enough to be recognized. You feel the stillness deepen. The group pauses. No one moves forward. No one calls out. There is only observation. This moment feels suspended balance between possibility and uncertainty. You might wonder what they are thinking, what they feel. Curiosity, caution, recognition, all of these perhaps existing together. A detail that often surprises people is that Neanderthals, once thought to be entirely separate and primitive, are now understood to have been quite sophisticated. They used tools, controlled fire, and may have engaged in forms of symbolic behavior. The differences between them and Homo sapiens were real but not absolute. This makes the encounter before you even more complex. These are not entirely unfamiliar beings, but they are not the same. The distant group shifts slightly, their movements slow and deliberate, much like the one you are with. There is no sudden action, no immediate approach, only distance and awareness. After a moment, your group begins to move again, gradually, quietly maintaining space while continuing their path. There is no confrontation, no clear interaction, just coexistence at a distance. You walk with them, feeling the quiet weight of what you have just witnessed. This world is not empty. It is shared, even if those who share it do so with care. Over time, such encounters may have shaped the course of human history in ways that are still being uncovered. The presence of genetic traces from these other groups in modern populations suggests that contact, at least in some cases, led to blending rather than separation. But here in this moment, the outcome is simply distance. You continue walking the land, gradually closing around you again as the ridge gives way to a more sheltered path. The air feels steady, the lights softening as the day moves forward. The group resumes its usual rhythm, the brief moment of heightened awareness fading back into the steady pattern of movement. And yet something has shifted. You now understand that this world holds more than one kind of human, more than one way of being, and that survival in this time is not only about adapting to the environment, but also about navigating the presence of others who share that same environment. You take a slow breath, letting the calm return. The footsteps continue. The land stretches ahead, and the quiet journey moves forward, carrying with it the unseen connections between different human paths. You continue walking with the group as the memory of that distant encounter fades gently into the background. The land stretches ahead in a familiar pattern, once more open ground, broken by patches of life shaped by the same quiet forces you have been observing all along. The air feels steady again, though still carrying that subtle unpredictability that never quite disappears. Time passes in a way that feels almost unmarked. Step after step, light shifting slowly across the ski, the steady rhythm of movement returning, and gradually something begins to change. Not in a sudden or dramatic way, but in a quiet, almost unnoticed form. To understand this shift, it helps to consider what happens after a period of strain. When conditions stabilize, even slightly, life has a way of responding. Plants begin to grow more consistently. Animals return to areas they may have avoided. Small patterns of abundance begin to reappear. You notice it first in the ground. The vegetation becomes slightly denser in places, forming small clusters that break the more barren stretches. The color deepens, shifting from pale tones to something a little richer. It's not a full recovery, but it is a sign. The group senses it too. Their movements relax just a fraction. There is still awareness, still care, but also a subtle easing that was not present before. They paused less frequently, their direction becoming more consistent. You follow as they move toward an area where the land dips gently, forming a shallow basin. From a distance, it appears darker, suggesting the presence of moisture or more concentrated plant life. As you approach, the details become clearer. Grass grows more thickly here. Small plants cluster closer together. The ground feels slightly softer underfoot. This is a place where resources are beginning to return. You might find yourself wondering how long such a recovery takes. Environmental systems do not change instantly. After periods of disruption, they adjust slowly, responding to shifts in temperature, rainfall, and sunlight. Even small improvements can create noticeable differences over time. The group spreads out again, but this time with less urgency. Their movements feel more exploratory, less constrained by immediate need. Individuals examine plants, test the soil, observe the surroundings with a sense that feels closer to curiosity than necessity. You watch as one person gathers a handful of plant material, inspecting it carefully before adding it to their collection. Others follow similar patterns, their actions steady and deliberate. A detail that often goes unmentioned is how quickly humans can respond to improving conditions. When resources become more available, even in small ways, behavior can shift. Movement becomes less pressured. Decisions carry a little more flexibility. You sit briefly on a low rise, observing the group as they move through this space. The light feels softer now, the air slightly more balanced. The dryness that lingered earlier seems less pronounced. It is not gone, but it is reduced. You take a slow breath, noticing how it feels easier, smoother, less sharp than before. The group regathers after some time, their collection modest but meaningful. There is no excess, but there is enough. And in this world, enough carries weight. You begin to sense how this moment fits into a larger pattern. After narrowing, after pressure, there is space for growth. Not immediately, not completely, but gradually. Some scientific interpretations suggest that after periods of reduced population size, human groups began to expand again, moving into new areas and increasing in number. This process would have been uneven, shaped by local conditions and opportunities. Other perspectives highlight how fragile such recovery could be. A return to growth does not mean stability. Conditions could shift again, bringing new challenges. You hold both ideas gently without needing to resolve them, because here in this moment what you see is simple. Life continuing, expanding slightly, breathing again. You walk with the group as they leave the basin carrying what they have gathered. Their pace is steady but lighter somehow, as if the weight of uncertainty has eased just a little. The land ahead remains open, but it no longer feels as strained. There is variation again, texture, signs of life that were less visible before. You might reflect on how small changes can shape the future in quiet ways. A slightly better season, a slightly more reliable source of food. These differences can allow groups to grow, to spread, to create new paths. Over time, these small changes accumulate. You notice how the group interacts now. There is a bit more space between individuals, a bit more movement, a sense that the immediate pressure has softened, and within that space something else begins to emerge. Possibility. You follow as they move towards another stretch of land where the light falls evenly across the ground. The sky above appears clearer now, the faint filtering you noticed earlier, less pronounced. It is not completely gone, but it is changing. You take a slow breath, letting the calm settle around you. The group continues forward. The land responds gently beneath your feet, and the world which once felt like it was narrowing begins to open again in small, quiet ways. Not through sudden transformation, but through gradual return. And as you walk alongside them, you begin to understand that survival is not only about enduring hardship, it's also about recognizing when the world begins to offer something back, even if only a little, even if only for a time. You continue forward with the group as the land begins to feel more responsive beneath your feet, and the quiet sense of recovery you noticed earlier settles more firmly into the world around you. The air carries a gentler balance now, and the light, though still soft, feels clearer, as if the sky itself is slowly returning to its usual clarity. The group moves with a steadier rhythm, their pace relaxed but purposeful. There is still awareness in every step, but it no longer feels shaped by immediate scarcity. Instead, there is a subtle openness in their movement, as if more possibilities exist within the landscape ahead. To understand this moment, you begin to notice how their tools reflect these changing conditions. You walk beside one individual who pauses to adjust a stone tool they carry. The edge is still sharp, but the shape is slightly different from what you observed earlier. It is more refined, more balanced, as if shaped not only for function, but for repeated use. Stone tool technology during this period was not static. Over time, techniques evolved, producing tools that were more efficient and more versatile. Archaeological findings from various regions show gradual improvements in how tools were shaped and used, suggesting a steady process of innovation. You watch as the individual tests the edge carefully against a small piece of wood, making a controlled cut. The motion is smooth, confident, guided by familiarity. A detail that often goes unnoticed is how even small improvements in a tool design can have meaningful effects. A sharper edge, a better grip, a more predictable shape, all of these can reduce effort and increase efficiency in daily tasks. You might find yourself comparing this to modern tools where change often happens rapidly and is driven by external design. Here change emerges slowly, shaped by experience, by trial and adjustment across generations. The group pauses briefly as others gather nearby, examining their own tools. There is a quiet exchange of attention, individuals observing one another, noticing differences, perhaps learning without direct instruction. Knowledge comme Monsieur Ledoux continues to move in subtle ways, through watching, through doing, through small adjustments that accumulate over time. You notice another individual working with a different type of tool, one that appears to combine stone with a handle made from wood or bone. The connection is simple, likely bound with plant fibers or sinew, but it creates a new level of functionality. Composite tools like this represent an important step forward. By combining materials, early humans could create implements that extended their capabilities, allowing for more precise cutting, digging, or shaping. The exact timeline of when such tools became common varies across regions, but evidence suggests that experimentation with combining materials was already underway during this broader period. You watch as the tool is used to shape a piece of wood, the motion steady and controlled. The sound is soft, rhythmic blending with the natural environment. You might reflect on how this quiet refinement of tools mirrors the gradual changes in the environment. Nothing done. Nothing dramatic, just steady progression. The group begins to move again, carrying their tools with the same care you have observed before. Each item remains valuable, not easily replaced, and treated with respect. You follow as they approach another area where the land dips slightly, revealing a small cluster of plants that appear more robust than those around them. The green is deeper here, the growth more consistent. Individuals spread out, examining the area with interest. You notice how their movements here are more exploratory, less constrained by urgency. There is time to observe, to test, to consider. This shift reflects something important. When immediate pressure decreases even slightly, it allows space for experimentation, for trying new approaches, for refining what already exists. Some researchers have suggested that periods of relative stability may have encouraged innovation, giving early humans the opportunity to develop new techniques and tools that would later support further expansion. Others point out that innovation can also arise under pressure as a response to necessity. The relationship between environment and creativity remains complex, shaped by many factors. You hold these ideas gently, allowing them to exist together. Because here in this moment, what you see is simple. People adapting, learning, improving. You sit briefly on the edge of the small cluster of plants, feeling the ground beneath you. It is softer here, holding more moisture, supporting more life. The difference is subtle but clear. The air feels slightly cooler, carrying a faint hint of freshness that was less present before. You take a slow breath, letting that sensation settle. The group regathers once more, their collection modest but sufficient. There is no rush to leave, but there is no reason to remain longer than necessary. Movement that continues. It always does. You stand and follow as they begin to move again, leaving the small patch of abundance behind. The land returns to its broader pattern, but the memory of that richer area remains. A point of reference, a place that may be revisited. You begin to understand how these experiences shape not only immediate survival, but future decisions. Where to go, where to return, where to avoid. These choices accumulate, forming a deeper understanding of the world. You walk alongside the group, feeling the rhythm of their movement settle into something calm and steady. The tools they carry reflect their growing skill. The land reflects its gradual recovery. And together these elements begin to shape a new phase of existence. Not entirely free from uncertainty, but no longer defined solely by it. You take another slow breath, letting the balance of the moment settle within you. The footsteps continue. The world responds, and within that quiet exchange you begin to see how small improvements in tools, in knowledge and environment can slowly build towards something larger. Something that allows humanity not just to endure, but to move forward. You continue with this group as the day settles into a calm, steady rhythm, and the land around you begins to feel more layered with possibility. The ground holds a mix of textures, now patches of firmness, stretches of softer soil, and occasional clusters of growth that suggest a quiet return of life. The air feels balanced, carrying neither the sharp dryness from before nor the heavier coolness of earlier mornings. The group moves with a gentle confidence, not rushed, not uncertain but attentive in a way that feels practiced and natural. Their path curves slightly, guided by signs that are not immediately obvious but clearly meaningful to them. To understand this phase, you begin to notice how knowledge itself has become one of their most valuable resources. Not something visible, not something you can hold, but something that shapes every decision. You walk beside one individual who pauses, briefly scanning the ground before taking a few steps to the side. There is no hesitation in the movement, only a quiet certainty. Others follow, adjusting their direction without question. This is not instinct alone, it is learned awareness. Over time, early humans developed a detailed understanding of their environment built through repeated experience. They learned where water might collect after rainfall, where certain plants tended to grow, where animals were more likely to pass through. This knowledge was not written down, it lived in memory and in shared experience. A detail that often escapes attention is how such knowledge could be highly specific to a region. What worked in one area might not apply in another. This meant that as groups moved into new environments, they had to learn again, adapting their understanding to unfamiliar conditions. You might imagine how challenging that could be. To leave behind what you know and begin again. The group slows as they approach a narrow stretch of land bordered by low vegetation. The plants here are different, slightly taller, with leaves that catch the light in a subtle way. A few individuals begin to examine them, touching, testing, selecting. You notice how careful they are. Not everything is safe to eat. Not everything is useful. Mistakes here could have consequences, and yet over time knowledge accumulates. Certain plants become familiar, trusted. You watch as one individual breaks a small piece from a plant and inspects it closely before placing it into a container. The movement is slow, deliberate, shaped by experience rather than guesswork. Nearby, another person uses a tool to dig lightly into the ground, uncovering a root that lies just beneath the surface. The soil parts easily here, suggesting moisture below. The root is removed, carefully cleaned with a few practiced motions, and added to the collection. You might reflect on how this quiet gathering process forms the foundation of daily life. It is not dramatic, it does not call attention to itself, but it provides stability in a way that is essential. Many reconstructions of early human diets emphasize the importance of plant foods alongside meat. While hunting provides significant nourishment, gathering often offers consistency, something that can be relied upon more regularly. You continue walking as the group regathers their collection, small but meaningful. Each item represents knowledge applied successfully. Each choice reflects understanding. You begin to sense how this knowledge connects to the broader changes you have been observing. As the environment stabilizes even slightly, it allows for more predictable patterns. Plants grow in more consistent ways. Water sources become more reliable. Animals follow more regular paths. And with that predictability, knowledge becomes more effective. You notice how the group's movements now feel less reactive and more guided. They are not simply responding to immediate conditions. They are moving with an expectation shaped by what they have learned over time. This shift is subtle, but important. You walk alongside them as they move toward another area where the land dips again, forming a shallow valley. The vegetation here appears more continuous, creating a gentle contrast with the more open terrain behind you. The air feels slightly cooler, carrying a faint hint of moisture. You take a slow breath, noticing how it feels easier, more balanced. The group spreads out once more, exploring the space with quiet attention. There is no urgency, but there is purpose. You sit briefly on a small rise, watching them move, and you begin to understand how knowledge itself becomes a form of stability. Not absolute, not unchanging, but adaptable, flexible, able to respond to new conditions while carrying forward what has been learned. Some researchers have explored how this growing body of knowledge may have supported the gradual expansion of human populations after periods of difficulty. With better understanding of the environment, groups could make more effective decisions, increasing their chances of survival. Others point out that knowledge alone is not enough. It must be combined with cooperation, with communication, with the ability to adapt when conditions shift again. You hold these ideas together without needing to choose between them, because here in this moment you see how they all connect. The land offers possibility, the group responds with understanding, and together they create a path forward. You stand again as the group begins to move their direction, now leading deeper into the valley. The light softens further as the sun lowers, casting long shadows that stretch gently across the ground. The world feels calm, balanced, not perfect, but holding. You follow, feeling the steady rhythm of movement settle within you once more. And as you walk, you begin to see how this quiet accumulation of knowledge, this gradual deepening of understanding, becomes one of the most powerful forces shaping human survival. Not through sudden change, but through steady awareness, carried from one moment to the next. You follow the group deeper into the shallow valley, as evening begins to return once again, and the light softens into a gentle glow that stretches across the land. The air feels calm, almost balanced, and the ground beneath your feet carries a quiet steadiness that feels familiar after so much change. The group slows near a cluster of low trees, their branches thin, but enough to break the open space into smaller, more sheltered pockets. This is not a permanent place, not a fixed destination, but it offers enough comfort for a pause. You settle with them as they begin to prepare for the night. The motions are familiar now. Gathering small branches, arranging materials, rekindling the fire with careful hands. The ember from earlier is placed gently among dry fibres, and with patience the flame returns once more, growing slowly into a steady source of warmth. You sit nearby, feeling the heat spread softly against your skin while the cool air settles just beyond its reach. And as the group gathers closer, your attention begins to shift towards something that has been quietly present all along. Memory. Not just individual memory, but shared memory. To understand this moment, it helps to consider how knowledge was preserved in a world without writing. Every skill, every piece of understanding, every observation about the land had to be carried forward through people. Nothing was stored outside of the mind. You watch as one of the older individuals begins to move their hands in a slow, deliberate pattern accompanied by soft sounds. The rhythm is gentle, almost soothing, and others nearby turn their attention toward them. This is not instruction in a formal sense, but it is something more than casual movement. It is repetition, a way of reinforcing what is known. You notice how the younger members of the group watch closely, their attention steady, their bodies still. They are not being told what to do in direct terms, but they are absorbing the patterns, the motions, the timing. Learning here is woven into moments like this, through observation, through shared presence. A detail that is easy to overlook is how fragile the system can be. Without written records, knowledge depends entirely on continuity. If a group loses individuals who hold certain skills or memories, that knowledge can disappear. This makes each person more important than they might first appear, not just as a participant in essay, but as a carrier of understanding. You sit quietly, letting the rhythm of the gestures and sounds settle into the space. The fire crackles softly, adding its own steady pattern to the moment. You might find yourself wondering how much information can be carried this way, how much can be remembered, how much can be passed forward without being lost. Some researchers have suggested that early human memory systems were highly developed, supported by repetition and strong social bonds. Others note that memory is always selective, shaped by what is practiced and what is not. So even in this system there is change. What is remembered? What fades? What is adapted? You notice how the gestures begin to repeat, forming a kind of sequence. It may relate to a task, to a place, to an experience that is being recalled and shared. The exact meaning is not clear to you, but the intention is to hold something, to keep it present. Nearby, another individual joins in, echoing part of the motion, adding a slight variation. The interaction is subtle, but it creates a sense of continuity between them. Memory here is not fixed. It is alive, shaped by each person who carries it. You might reflect on how this process forms the foundation for everything that comes later. Stories, traditions, cultural knowledge, all of these begin in moments like this, where experience is shared and repeated. The group remains gathered, their attention focused, their presence steady. The firelight flickers across their faces, creating shifting patterns that feel almost hypnotic. The air grows cooler as night deepens, but the warmth of the fire holds the center of the space. You feel the contrast clearly now. Warmth and cold, light and darkness, presence and absence, and within that contrast memory persists. You notice a child quietly repeating one of the gestures, their movements slower, less precise, but clearly connected to what they have observed. The older individual watches briefly, then continues without interruption. There is no correction, no pressure, only space for learning. You might find this calming in its simplicity, knowledge in saying not forced. It is allowed to settle, to take shape over time. You take a slow breath, feeling the rhythm of the moment align with your own. The fire continues to burn. The gestures continue to repeat. The group remains together. And beyond them, beyond this small circle of light, the wider world continues its quiet transformation. But here in this moment, something is being preserved. Something that cannot be seen in the land or the sky. Something carried within people, passed from one to another. You sit there a little longer, letting the calm deepen. And you begin to understand that survival during this time is not only about finding food or shelter. It is about remembering, about holding on to what has been learned, and ensuring that it does not disappear, even as everything else continues to change. You remain with the group as the night gently gives way once more to the earliest light of morning, and the world begins its slow return from darkness. The fire has dimmed again, leaving only a faint warmth behind, and the air carries that familiar coolness that lingers just before sunrise. The group stirs quietly. There is no rush, no sudden movement, just a gradual return to awareness. You rise with them as they prepare to move again, stepping out from the cluster of trees and back into the open land. The sky brightens slowly, revealing a landscape that feels subtly different from the one you first entered. It's not a dramatic transformation, but something has shifted. To understand this change, you begin to notice how the environment itself is responding over time. The patterns of dryness and scarcity you observed earlier have softened. The land is still uneven, still shaped by variation, but there are more signs of continuity now. More patches of growth, more consistent textures in the soil, more small indications that the system is stabilizing. You walk alongside the group as they move across this evolving terrain, your steps falling into the steady rhythm that has carried you through this journey. The air feels slightly fuller now, less sharp, more balanced. You take a slow breath and notice how it settles more easily. This is what recovery looks like, not a sudden return to abundance, but a gradual easing of strain. You notice how the group responds. Their movements are still careful but less constrained. They pause when needed, but not as frequently. There is a quiet confidence in the way they move, shaped by the return of more reliable conditions. You follow as they approach an area where the land dips gently, revealing a small stretch of greenery that appears more continuous than what you have seen before. The plants here grow closer together, forming a soft layer across the ground. The group spreads out, examining the area with interest. You kneel briefly, touching the soil. It feels slightly damp, holding moisture that supports the growth above it. The difference is subtle but meaningful. A detail that is often overlooked is how quickly ecosystems can begin to respond once conditions improve even slightly. These seeds that remain dormant may begin to grow. Small changes in temperature and rainfall can create noticeable shifts in plant life. These changes in turn affect everything else. Animals return, food becomes more predictable, movement becomes less urgent. You watch as one individual gathers plant material with steady hands, selecting carefully but without the same intensity you observed earlier. Others follow similar patterns, their actions reflecting a balance between awareness and ease. The group regathers after some time, their collection modest but enough. And once again that word holds weight. Enough! You stand and look out across the land, noticing how the variation remains but feels less extreme. The contrast between barren and fertile areas is still present, but it is softer now, less pronounced. The world feels as if it is finding its balance again. You might reflect on how fragile that balance can be, how easily it can shift, and how important it is for survival. Some interpretations of environmental records suggest that periods of instability were often followed by phases of relative calm where systems had the opportunity to recover. These phases may not have been long-lasting, but they provided space for life to adjust and continue. Other perspectives emphasize that such recovery is rarely complete and that fluctuations continue sometimes in ways that are difficult to predict. You hold these ideas gently without needing to resolve them, because here what you see is clear. The land is responding. The group is adapting. Life continues. You walk with them as they move onward, their direction guided by the same quiet understanding you have come to recognize. The path is not marked, but it is known in a way that goes beyond visible signs. You begin to sense how this period of this lost age is not defined only by its difficulties, it's also shaped by resilience, by the ability to continue through change, to adjust, to respond. You notice how the group interacts as they walk. There is space between them, but also connection. A glance here, a small adjustment there. Movements that reflect both independence and unity. This balance is part of their strength. You take a slow breath, feeling the air settle around you as the sun rises higher, bringing a gentle warmth that contrasts with the coolness of the early morning. The light spreads evenly now, illuminating the land in soft tones. The world feels calm, not perfect, but stable enough to hold. You follow as the group moves toward another stretch of land where the ground rises slightly, offering a wider view of what lies ahead. And as you walk, you begin to understand that recovery is not a return to what once was. It is something new, shaped by what has been lost and what has endured. You carry that understanding with you as you continue forward step by step through a world that is slowly finding its balance again. You continue with the group as the morning grows brighter and the land ahead begins to feel more familiar in its variation. The gentle recovery you have been sensing lingers, though it never settles completely. There is always a slight uncertainty beneath it, like a quiet reminder that the balance can shift again. The ground rises slowly beneath your feet, leading you toward a broader stretch of terrain where the horizon opens wide. From here, the landscape unfolds in layers, patches of growth, stretches of bare earth and distant shapes that hint at water or shelter. The group pauses briefly at this higher point, not to rest, but to observe. You notice how still they become, their attention moving outward across the land. This moment is not passive. It is active in a quieter way, a gathering of information before the next decision is made. To understand this behavior, you begin to notice how adaptation works on more than one level. It is not only about reacting to immediate conditions, but also about adjusting patterns over time. Small changes in behavior can make a difference when repeated again and again. You watch as one individual shifts direction slightly, taking a path that curves along the edge of a more vegetated area rather than cutting directly across open ground. Others follow without hesitation. This is a small choice, but it carries meaning. Moving along the edge of resources allows for both access and awareness. It provides options, the ability to gather, to observe, to adjust without committing fully to one path. You begin to see how these kinds of decisions form a larger pattern, a way of moving through the world that is flexible rather than fixed. You follow as the group descends from the rise, their pace steady and measured. The air feels warmer now, though not uncomfortably so, and the light carries a gentle clarity that was less present before. The land beneath your feet shows more variation again. Small clusters of plants, subtle changes in soil texture, signs that the environment is continuing to respond. You notice how the group spreads out slightly, not in urgency, but in exploration. Individuals move with a sense of curiosity, examining the ground, the plants, the small details that indicate opportunity. This is adaptation in action, not a single response, but a continuous process. You might reflect on how this differs from the way adaptation is often imagined. It is not always dramatic, it does not always involve sudden change. More often it appears in small adjustments, a shift in direction, a change in timing, a different choice. Over time, these adjustments accumulate, shaping behavior in ways that are difficult to see in a single moment. You walk alongside one individual who pauses to examine a patch of ground where the soil appears darker. They kneel briefly, touching it, then glance toward a nearby cluster of plants. There is a connection here, moisture, growth, possibility. They move toward it and others follow. The group begins to gather again, their actions steady and practiced. There is no rush, but there is purpose. Each movement reflects an understanding of how to make use of what the land offers. A detail that is often overlooked is how flexible early human diets and behaviours needed to be. Rather than relying on a single source of food or a fixed routine, they adapted, constantly shifting their focus as conditions changed. This flexibility is one of their greatest strengths. You sit briefly near the edge of the gathering area, watching as the group moves through the space. The air feels balanced, carrying a faint warmth that settles comfortably around you. The sounds are soft, the movement's steady, the world feels calm again. And yet beneath that calm, the process of adjustment continues. You might wonder how much of this adaptation is conscious, how much is deliberate, and how much is simply learned through repetition. Some perspectives suggest that early humans developed an intuitive understanding of their environment, responding to patterns without needing to analyze them in explicit terms. Others propose that learning and decision-making were more deliberate, shaped by shared knowledge and communication. The truth likely includes elements of both. You rise again as the group begins to move their direction, now guided by the opportunities they have found. The path is not fixed, but it is not random either. It is shaped by experience, by observation, by the quiet accumulation of knowledge over time. You follow, feeling the rhythm of their movements settle into something steady and reassuring. The land continues to shift beneath your feet, offering new details with each step. Small variations, subtle changes, each one contributing to the larger picture. And as you walk, you begin to understand that adaptation during this period is not about overcoming the environment. It is about moving with it, adjusting continuously, responding without resistance. You take a slow breath, letting the balance of the moment settle within you. The group moves forward. The land responds. And within that quiet exchange, you see how survival is shaped not by a single decision, but by countless small choices made again and again in a world that never fully stands still. You continue moving with the group as the day settles into a quiet, even rhythm, and the landscape stretches forward with a sense of calm that feels more stable than before. The air is balanced, the light soft but clear, and the ground beneath your feet carries a steadiness that reflects the gradual recovery you have been noticing. There is no sudden change, no clear boundary where one phase ends and another begins, only a slow unfolding. You walk alongside them as they move across this gently shifting terrain, and your attention begins to turn towards something less immediate, something that reaches beyond the present moment. The longer arc of this time, because what you have been walking through is not just a series of days or seasons, it is a turning point, a period that will shape everything that follows. To understand this, you begin to consider how events like this leave traces, not always in obvious ways, not always in visible forms, but in patterns that persist across generations. You notice how the group continues its steady movement, their actions familiar, now gathering, observing, adjusting. They are not aware of the larger significance of their lives, and yet they are part of it. Every step they take, every decision they make, every moment they survive, all of it contributes to a path that extends far beyond what they can see. You pause briefly on a small rise, looking out across the land as it stretches into the distance. The variation remains, patches of growth, open ground, subtle differences in texture and colour. But it feels more connected now, less fragmented, as if the world itself is beginning to hold together again. You might reflect on how this period, this lost age, is remembered not through stories passed down in a continuous line, but through fragments, through clues uncovered much later. Genetic patterns, layers of ash, tools left behind, each one offering a glimpse but never the full picture. This is what makes it so difficult to fully explain. There is no single record, no complete account, only pieces that must be brought together carefully. You watch as the group moves forward, their presence steady within the landscape. They are not marked by the struggle you've been sensing, at least not visibly. They continue as they always have. And yet their continued existence is the result of something extraordinary. They endured. Somehow, through whatever combination of conditions shaped this period, they remained. You might find yourself wondering about all the others who did not. The groups that disappeared, the paths that ended, these are not visible here, but they are part of the story. An often overlooked aspect of population change is that survival is not evenly distributed. Some groups persist. Others fade sometimes due to factors that are not fully understood. Chance plays a role, location plays a role, Small differences can lead to very different outcomes. You hold that thought gently without letting it disrupt the calm of the moment. Because here what you see is continuity. You walk with the group as they descend from the rise, their path leading toward another stretch of land that shows signs of life. The ground feels familiar now, the pattern's easier to read even for you. The rhythm has settled into something steady, reliable. You notice how the group interacts with the land now. There is less hesitation, more flow. They move with a quiet confidence that reflects not just adaptation but familiarity. The world, while still changing, is becoming something they can move through more easily. You take a slow breath, feeling the air settle comfortably around you. The light continues to shift, softening as the day moves toward evening once again. The cycle continues, day into night, night into day, carrying with it the steady passage of time. And within that passage, something has been preserved, something that will continue. You begin to understand that this lost age is not defined only by what happened within it, but by what came after, by the fact that humanity continued at all. You look at the group again, their forms moving steadily across the land, their presence quiet but certain. They do not know that they are part of a narrow thread. They do not know that their survival will shape the entire future of their species. They simply live, move, adapt, and continue. You follow them, feeling the rhythm of their movements settle deeply within you. The land stretches ahead, the air remains calm, the world holds its quiet balance. And as you walk, you begin to see how this period, once so uncertain, once so fragile, has left its mark, not through dramatic events, but through the simple fact of endurance. A quiet continuation, carried forward, step by step. You continue forward with the group as the light begins to soften once more, and the steady rhythm of movement carries you across a landscape that now feels both familiar and quietly transformed. The air is calm, the ground responsive, and the patterns of life around you feel more stable than they did before. And yet as you walk, your awareness begins to drift beyond what can be seen. Because even now, even with all that has been observed and carefully studied, there are parts of this story that remain out of reach. To understand this, you begin to consider how modern science approaches the distant past. The evidence that survives from this time is incomplete, scattered, and often difficult to interpret. Each discovery adds to the picture, but also raises new questions. You look at the group again, their movements steady, their actions grounded in the present. There is nothing in their behavior that reveals the uncertainty surrounding their time, and yet that uncertainty exists, deep within the layers of knowledge built thousands of years later. You walk beside them, feeling the soft texture of the ground beneath your feet, noticing how the light continues to shift gently across the land. Some of the questions that remain are surprisingly fundamental. How severe was the population decline during this period? Was it sudden or gradual? Did it occur everywhere or only in certain regions? Different lines of evidence offer different answers. Genetic data suggests a narrowing of diversity, but the exact scale of that narrowing is still being refined. Environmental records show signs of change, but not always in the same way across different locations. Archaeological findings reveal continuity in some places and disruption in others. These pieces do not always fit together neatly. You might find it calming in a quiet way to accept that not every question has a clear answer, that the past, especially one so distant, carries its own fallings. You notice how the group continues without any awareness of these unknowns. They move through their world with a clarity that comes from direct experience, not from analysis or interpretation. Their knowledge is immediate. Yours is reflective. You walk with them as they cross a stretch of land where the ground feels slightly uneven, shaped by subtle shifts in moisture and growth. The air carries a gentle warmth balanced by a faint coolness that hints at the approaching evening. You take a slow breath, letting the moment settle, and you begin to think about how scientific understanding evolves. What was once considered certain can later be questioned. What seems unclear today may become clearer with new discoveries. This process is ongoing, always adjusting, always refining. Some researchers have suggested that the idea of a single dramatic bottleneck may be too simple, and that the reality involved a more complex pattern of population changes across different regions. Others continue to explore the possibility that rare events played a significant role, even if their effects were uneven. The discussion continues, quietly, carefully, much like the world you're walking through. You notice a small detail as you move, A patch of ground where the soil appears slightly disturbed not recently, but enough to suggest past activity. It is a reminder that traces remain even when they are faint. The past leaves marks, but not always in ways that are easy to read. You follow the group as they move toward another gentle rise, their path guided by the same quiet awareness you have seen throughout this journey. The land opens once more, offering a broader view. The sky above is clear now, the light steady, the faint filtering from earlier less noticeable. The world feels calm, balanced, and yet the deeper story remains partially hidden. You might reflect on how this balance between knowledge and uncertainty is part of what makes this period so compelling. It invites curiosity but also patience. It asks you to observe, to consider, to accept that some parts of the story will always remain just beyond reach. You stand for a moment at the rise, looking out across the land and letting that thought settle gently. The group continues forward their movement, steady, uninterrupted. Life continues, regardless of how much is understood. You follow, feeling the rhythm of their steps align with your own. The ground feels firm beneath you. The air remains calm, and within that quiet continuity you begin to understand that this lost age is not defined only by what can be explained, but also by what cannot. The unanswered questions, the incomplete patterns, the spaces where certainty fades, and as you walk alongside the group moving through a world that is both known and unknown, you begin to see how those unanswered questions do not take away from the story. They deepen it. You continue forward with the group as the day settles into its final stretch and the light begins to lower once again across the land. The sky softens into warmer tones, and the long shadows return, stretching quietly beside you, as if marking the passage of time in a way that feels both steady and calm. The world around you feels balanced now, not perfect, but holding. The group moves with a quiet confidence, their pace, even their awareness still present but no longer shaped by immediate strain. The rhythm you have followed from the beginning has settled into something almost familiar, and as you walk, something within your perspective begins to shift. You are no longer just observing. You begin to feel as if you are part of this movement, part of this small group. To understand this moment, you allow yourself to imagine something more personal. What if you were one of them, not standing at the edge, but fully within? You feel the ground beneath your feet not as something you step across, but as something you depend on. Each step matters not just for movement, but for survival. The texture of the soil, the firmness of the ground, these are not background details. They are information. You notice the air, the way it feels against your skin, the subtle shifts in temperature, the faint changes that signal what might come next. You're aware of everything, because you have to be. You glance at the others not as distant figures, but as your group, the people you rely on, the ones who share this path with you. Their presence is constant, essential. You understand now that in a world where numbers are limited, where encounters with others are rare, each person carries weight beyond what can be easily described. If one is lost, something is lost with them. A skill, a memory, a connection. You might feel that awareness settle quietly within you, not as fear, but as understanding. You walk beside them, feeling the rhythm of their movement as your own. The decisions they make, the paths they choose, these are no longer separate from you. You are part of it. You notice how the group adjusts direction, slightly moving towards a stretch of land that shows signs of life. You follow without hesitation, trusting the shared knowledge that guides these choices. This is what it means to live here, not to question every step, but to move with what is known, and adapt when it changes. You might reflect on how different this feels from modern life, where certainty often comes from external systems, maps, tools, information stored outside of the self. Here everything is internal, carried within the body, within the mind, within the group. You pause briefly as the group slows, taking in the land ahead. The air feels calm, the light soft, the world steady. And in that moment you feel something else, a quiet awareness of how close everything is, how fragile. Fragile. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a simple, undeniable way. There is no excess here, no margin for waste. Everything matters. You take a slow breath, feeling the air settle within you, grounding you further in this perspective. You begin to understand how survival during this time is not something that happens once. It happens continuously, through attention, through cooperation, through small repeated actions. You look at the others, again noticing the subtle ways they interact. A glance exchanged, a slight adjustment in pace. Movements that reflect connection without needing words. You feel that connection now, not as an observer, but as part of it. And within that connection you sense something deeper, resilience, not as strength in the usual sense, but as the ability to continue, to adjust, to remain, even when conditions shift, even when the future is uncertain. You walk forward with them step by step, feeling the steady rhythm of movement carry you across the land. The world stretches ahead, the air remains calm, the light continues to soften, and within that quiet continuity you begin to understand what it truly means to be part of this lost age. Not as a distant story, but as a lived experience. A moment in time where survival depends on presence, on awareness, on connection. You carry that understanding with you as you continue forward, feeling the steady balance of the world around you. And for a moment, everything feels simple, clear, grounded. You are here. You are part of this group, and you continue. You continue walking with the group as the light lowers into its final gentle glow, and the day begins to dissolve into evening once more. The air cools softly around you, settling across your skin in a way that feels familiar now, almost expected. The land stretches quietly ahead no longer. Uncertain, no longer strained, but not entirely stable either. It simply exists, and you move within it. The group slows as they reach another open stretch where the ground is even and the horizon wide. There is no clear reason to stop here, and yet they do. The choice feels natural, guided by a sense that is difficult to define. You pause with them. The moment is calm, unhurried, complete in its simplicity, and as you stand there, your awareness begins to widen one final time, not just across the land, but across time itself. Everything you have witnessed, the quiet narrowing, the subtle changes in the air and ground, the careful movement, the shared knowledge, all of it begins to settle into a larger understanding. This was not a single event, not a sudden collapse, not a clear turning point marked by one moment. It was something quieter, a period where humanity became thin, where the thread of survival narrowed, where only a small number of paths continued forward. You look at the group beside you, their presence steady, their movements simple, their lives unfolding without awareness of what they represent, and yet they are the ones who remain. Their steps carry forward what others could not. Their choices shape what will come. You might find it striking how ordinary it all feels. There is no sign here of something extraordinary, no indication that this moment holds such importance. They gather small materials. They prepare for the night. They sit close to the fire once it is lit again. Life continues in the same quiet rhythm, and that is the point. The lost age is not defined by what changed dramatically. It is defined by what endured quietly. You sit with them as the fire begins to glow once more, its warmth spreading gently into the cool air. The light flickers across the ground, casting soft shadows that move and settle in slow patterns. The group draws closer. Their presence forms a small circle again, contained, connected. You might reflect on how this simple arrangement has carried through all that you have seen. Fire at the center, people gathered around it, sharing warmth, sharing presence. It's a pattern that persists, across time, across change. You take a slow breath, feeling the calm of the moment settle fully within you. The air is cool, the fire warm, the sound soft. Everything feels balanced. And in that balance, the meaning of this journey becomes clear. Humanity did not survive this period through strength alone, or through a single discovery, or through one defining moment. It survived through countless small acts, through movement, through cooperation, through learning, through remembering, through adapting again and again. You look at the group one last time, their faces softened by the firelight, their movements quiet and familiar. They do not know what lies ahead. They do not know how their path will extend, but they continue. And that's enough. The light fades further as night settles in the sky, deepening into a calm, endless dark. The stars begin to appear again, soft points of light scattered across the vastness above. The world returns to stillness, and you remain there for a moment longer, feeling the quiet presence of everything around you. The land, the air, the fire, the people, all connected in a way that feels simple and complete. Then gently your awareness begins to drift. The movement slows, the details soften, the edges of the world begin to blur, and you carry with you the quiet understanding of what this lost age truly was. Not a mystery to be solved completely, but a moment to be felt, a time when humanity came close to disappearing, and yet did not. You take one final slow breath, and allow the calm to settle. The fire glows softly, the night deepens, and everything fades gently into rest. Now as the story comes to a close, the pace softens even further. You remain in that quiet space where the fire has settled into a low, steady warmth, and the air around you feels calm and still. The group rests nearby, their presence no longer something you follow, but something that simply exists alongside you. The night stretches gently across the land, the stars above remain steady, and the world feels at peace. You begin to let go of the details, the movements, the questions. They drift slowly away like the last traces of smoke rising from the fire. What remains is simpler, a sense of continuity, a quiet awareness that life, even in its most fragile moments, finds a way to continue. You might feel your own breathing slow now, matching the calm rhythm of the scene. In and out, steady, unhurried. The ground beneath you feels firm, the air soft, the warmth gentle. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to understand, only the quiet presence of a story that has already been carried forward. And as the fire fades into embers and the night settles fully around you, you can allow yourself to rest, knowing that this journey, like so many before it, has come to its natural end. Sweet dreams.